Hello everyone, welcome to What If Quirkless Deku got Albedo's Ultimatrix and became Supreme Anti-Hero Part 1. Before we start, please go support Albedo 13003 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some mistake in character's gender, but of course Deku is a male. Izuku Midoriya, a genius like no other, a boy of great intellect and wisdom that no one could surpass. That unfortunately was born in a world where power is everything, where having a superpower would define everything about you and what your life would be like, even how long you would live. Abused and humiliated for years, after so much suffering, a special object fell to him from space, and with it he will achieve everything, and everything will be able to change. To show everyone that he is not a Deku, weakling or loser. He will show the world that they never had to face him. He, who is IZUKU Supreme. Prologue, from space came to him. Omnipresent narrator POV. Another day began in the city of Mistreated, in a world where superpowers exist. The origins of these still remain unknown, and the reason why, theorizing that it is an evolution for living beings on planet Earth. The first case being more than 980 years ago, where a baby was born in a hospital with the peculiarity of having a skin that released a large amount of light. Everyone was alarmed or surprised by this discovery. Several theories were formulated at that time. From it being a message from God, that girl was the Messiah, to others who said it was an alien. But it was not the only baby or child born like that. As the years passed, more identical people appeared, showing to possess super gifts, making them superior to human beings. And as more time passed, these people were replaced by the old humanity, which was now called Quirkless, now being considered as the trash of society. Another thing to mention is that in history, more than one person with this gift was seen doing bad deeds, using them for their own benefit. But among the darkness, the light of hope appeared, altruistic people who used their gift to protect the weak and save people from evil, who were the people known as villains for using their gift for their own benefit. That gave birth to the profession of hero. A profession where every person aspired to obtain and become. But unfortunately, that title that brought hope and great pride was transformed and distorted into something rotten and worthless. Hit. A black-haired man with green locks was thrown against a wall, falling into trash cans. His left eye was purple and a light line of blood ran down his lip. Ha ha ha, see what happens when you continue with that silly dream of becoming a hero, Deku said, an ash-haired blonde with eyes, with a proud and arrogant smile, as well as superior. Just give up to Izuku, you will never achieve it. Only stupid Gwen is the only one who believes in you, that stupid girl only wastes her time with you, said a green-haired girl with emerald eyes, crossing her arms and shaking her head with a smile, her tone of voice being funny and mocking. Izuku just lowered his head without answering, tears beginning to fall down his cheeks. But it was at that moment that he was held by the collar of his shirt, now being faced by the two girls. Stop crying, faggot, or do you want me to break your face even more? Said the ruby eye with anger and disgust in her voice. Please stop, said Izuku with some difficulty and crying. The ashen-haired girl clicked her tongue before throwing the black-haired boy to the ground. Hump, you really are pathetic, Oni-chan, said the green-haired girl with disappointment. Let's go, I'm already bored of him, said the ashen-haired girl before starting to leave, putting her hands in the pockets of her clothes. Yes, me too, this is not fun anymore, it's sad, said the green-haired girl with an amused smile before following her friend. Izuku just stayed in that place, crying bitterly. Why am I so pathetic? Why couldn't I have been born with a gift? Why does everyone hate me? I really was pathetic. I was born without a particularity, without a quirk, in a world where having it is everything. Where having a power symbolizes and will mark your social, economic, working status, etc. It also depends on whether you live or die. People with quirks hate people without quirks, as if they were a plague on this world. They have caused the death of several Quirkless, between voluntary, involuntary, predetermined, non-predetermined murders, to the point of provoking them indirectly, hiring people for that. Or provoking the suicide of those people to the psychological and physical extreme. Unfortunately, the 20% that makes up the population of people without quirks, Quirkless, has not decreased and has not had any major downturn. Always staying in their place, as if the death of so many of them would only control that percentage and not allow it to increase. Meanwhile, Izuku hugged his legs and brought his head to his knees, covering his head with them, as he began to cry with great bitterness. It was at that moment that some footsteps were heard approaching him. Looking out of the corner of his eye, he saw a brown-haired girl whose hair is tied in a ponytail, purple eyes, wearing a double sweater, a blue one under a turtleneck and a lighter lavender one, black pants and boots with red laces. It was noticeable that the girl was 11 years old. The girl ran up to him to stop next to him and start checking him. Her gaze only conveyed concern. "Izuku, calm down, I'm already healing you." She hugged him while a purple aura of energy from her body and began to heal the black-haired man. "Jidwen," Izuku pronounced incredulously and sadly. Yeah, I'm here, there is no need to fear anymore, but I have a question for you, was it them again?" Gwen asked calmly and stroking the black-haired man's head. There was no answer, but she didn't need it. She just sighed. Her friend who is a year younger than her only sobbed while she hugged him against her chest. He looked at the black-haired man with a dark look as his eyes glowed neon purple. The aura that surrounded him altered, before looking like waves of water, now looking more like a raging fire. But it didn't hurt the innocent person in his arms. The next day, Izuku gulped as he got on the bus and sighed. In the distance he could see his friend Gwen getting on another bus. This was all about a school trip to a camp where they will only be there for about 5 days. It's not a big deal, it's mostly for some studies. Although surely that last thing only applies to him, while everyone has fun carefree with their quirks. "Move aside, Deku," said Katsumi, pushing the black-haired man aside, to then be pushed again by Izumi, who almost threw him to the ground. "Run, Oniai-chan," said Izumi, passing by Izuku's right side after pushing him. He didn't answer and just walked to the back, where all the unoccupied seats were. He just sighed bitterly and sat in the corner, before putting on the hood of his sweatshirt that he wears over his academy clothes. Before taking out a diary with the name Hero/Villain Notes V.18. This is a hobby he has. He loves to write down the quirks he sees, no matter what they are: useful, weak, powerful, skilled, useless, hero, villain, anti-hero, anti-villain, or civilian. This was a small consolation that he invented and wants to continue believing that he is, due to his lack of quirk. That reminded him of something else. Looking in his bag for the academy, he saw out of the corner of his eye another notebook he had. Fantastic Quirks V.3. A notebook where you write down the quirks that came to your head. In other words, a quirk that he invented based on his high educational and scientific knowledge, or data obtained from other quirks. That's another thing worth mentioning. His high intellect and adaptability, as well as learning, in the words of the small number of people who treat him more or less neutrally, would say that he is a sponge for everything related to science, physics, chemistry, mechanics, technology, quirks, etc. Being quite good at applying everything he learns. It's a shame that today's society stops people like him, with the most intelligent people concentrating on discovering more about quirks, researching how to use them better or making inventions for them. Apart from giving everyone the idea of becoming heroes. If it weren't for that, if quirks hadn't appeared, the solar system would have already belonged to all of humanity. Colonizing the moon is the first planet apart from his own, but unfortunately those advances never came and all the effort of scientists was focused solely on quirks. Although it did not take away that there were technological advances, these do not compare to anything that humanity would have been without quirks, or those that will follow in the future in some stories thousands of years. Well, there is Wi-Fi. Izuku thought, taking out a tablet, and began to search for information on it. At night after returning home, the last thing he did was do his homework and then continue researching electronics and the creation of devices. He had some ideas for gadgets. Unfortunately, he did not have the materials, but he had achieved something. A program dealing with a simulator to experiment, allowing him to make simulations of his gadgets and projects. It was difficult for him, but it only took him a week to do it, spending his days in normality and tranquility. For Izuku, if he had taken it more seriously like the scientists, he would have done it in maximum 5 days, unlike them who would have it instantly on the same day. At least that is his opinion. Izuku sighed. He just wanted all this to end and return home to continue investigating. All this was a waste of time. After all, he could get any information he gets on this trip from the internet. He didn't understand why, even after so many generations, most adults still prefer the old school. The only good thing he finds about it are the books, which are really the only thing with maximum value for him. He really loves reading any kind of book, as long as it is interesting and entertaining. Some time later. Hey! Why are you alone? Gwen asked, approaching Izuku, who blushed, and his shyness came out the closer the girl got to him. No, I'm not alone, Izuku said, looking away. Like that? And who's with you? Gwen asked, raising an eyebrow curiously. Well, you're here with me, Izuku said, embarrassed and with a big blush. Gwen wouldn't admit it openly, but those made her smile fondly and feel a more comfortable environment. You know I don't mean that, but thanks for the words, Gwen said to sit next to Izuku, who just sighed. I know, he answered and then looked up. Gwen followed her example and looked up, seeing the beautiful stars that were only seen far from civilization. Yes, they really are beautiful, Gwen said with a tiny smile, but with tranquility and peace in her tone. The only thing that united the two of them was this: a hobby of looking into space, seeing the stars every night. A topic of interest to both of them, and that caught each other's attention. And how have you been doing with your cousin Benjamin? Izuku asked to start a conversation. The brunette just snorted and crossed her arms. He's a total idiot, by the way. Did you see him? He was supposed to come with you, Gwen said with annoyance, and raising an eyebrow to look at the black-haired man, who nodded. Yes, he was the center of attention with his games on the bus. After that, I think he found himself playing video games all day. Although he ended up verbally fighting with my sister Kene, and went for a walk in the forest, Izuku said calmly and in a relaxed manner, the atmosphere between them helping with that. Well, I hope he doesn't cause any problems, Gwen said, sighing and with a disinterested tone. Shouldn't you worry about him? Izuku asked, a little out of place with her friend's attitude. Here is the group of hussycats taking care of us, so I shouldn't worry, Gwen said calmly and quietly, smiling at Izuku, who nodded. I think his group is in internship, Izuku said, somewhat thoughtful. Aren't they already graduated? Gwen asked, confused. She saw how Izuku looked slightly thoughtful before shrugging his shoulders. I don't really know, they're not that famous yet that there's that much information about them. Izuku's answer was sincere and honest, something that Gwen liked. Well, I know you'll get it any moment, Gwen said before giving Izuku a little slap on the head, who blushed furiously up to his ears. But it was at that moment that two lights illuminated them, one red and one green. Looking up, they saw two lights of those colors with their respective trails. The green one headed over the forest, before deviating illogically and supernaturally. It was at that moment that an even more intense light appeared in the sky, as if it were a sun, before shrinking to nothing more than the size of fireflies for the two who saw. This was the red light, which fell towards the camp. Boom! A colossal red explosion was seen in the camp, causing both friends to open their eyes in horror. But Izuku was taken out of his surprise and disbelief when Gwen began to run towards the camp. He quickly got up and began to follow her, not wanting to leave her alone anymore when she approached danger. It didn't take long for them. Once there, they saw the fire burning and devouring things. The most amazing thing was the fire that was red. Wait a moment, there were two lights from the sky, Izuku said, to turn around and see a fire forming in the orange fire forest. I'm going for my cousin. Stay here outside the camp and wait for help to arrive, Gwen said seriously before being enveloped by a green aura and starting to run towards the forest, where the second fire was forming. Izuku listened. It wasn't like he could do anything either. He felt truly useless at that moment, but something caught his attention. A red flash appeared out of the corner of his eye. Izuku turned his gaze and saw his sister Kene buried in rubble with a flash of light behind her. Time stopped at that moment. He clenched his hands in an Ulo shape with great tension in his body before sighing. In his mind he repeated several times that All Might would not let any person die no matter what they had done, and who they were. He ran as fast as he could and reached his sister. It was at that moment that he noticed how the red fire faded and died quickly. The entire camp magically went out. This helped him a lot, only having to pull Izumi, who was badly injured but still conscious. "Izuku," Izumi said incredulously and looking her brother in the eyes, although he had a cold look. The green-haired girl only looked at him before beginning to close her eyes and falling unconscious. Izuku noticed this and sighed, deciding to leave her lying on the side. Now turning his gaze to the real reason why he was there. The flash of red light could be seen through a pile of rubble. Izuku began to walk towards it, going around the rubble, and was amazed at what he found. The light was emitted by a bubble of red energy with these electric ones in it, the energy coming from a disc with a strange shape in red that he couldn't see well. The bubble fluttered and flickered a little before disintegrating. Izuku, ignoring the danger and his previous horror and terror, approached the object that fell to the ground and took it in his hands. It was a silver disc, with a black circle on one of its sides, where there was a fragmented clock symbol as if it were glass. On its sides there was also black occupying the leftover places. The clock symbol emitted a red light that flickered slightly. "What the hell is this?" Izuku wondered incredulously, lifting the object in his hands and looking at it with great interest. Chapter 1: Start of Repair and Terrible Accident. Narrator POV. Izuku sat in a chair in front of his work table. After the accident in the forest, everyone was returned to their homes. Of the 120 students who went that day, only 78 returned. A shame, but one that couldn't matter less to Izuku for several reasons. His best friend's cousin turned out to now have a quirk, after believing he was also a quirkless. From the story he was told, a relative in the United States created a device for him to control his quirk, which tries to turn its owner into different life forms. This same one was discovered in the camp where he was about to die. He woke up and gave Benjamin a form to save himself. Izuku felt all this was very timely, especially because of how the device his relative had given him was. Izuku took out his phone and saw an image, the device that Benjamin has to use his quirk. A great coincidence that he was at the time and place when the green light fell from the sky and crashed in front of him, causing an orange fire, not like the red light that burned with red fire. Izuku was a genius, and something like that story would never convince him. Besides, the symbol on the device was clearly the same one he found that time, from the red light that appeared. He moved in his room with the mobile chair he had, and approached a small table with drawers, where he took out the disc he obtained that day, although now it had a big difference, and that was that the light had completely gone out. Izuku snorted at that and more to see what the device was like. Identical to the symbol that appears when Benjamin transforms. He knows this because once at the academy he arrived and began to boast about his new gift. Unfortunately, that caused people to no longer hate Benjamin and focus on making Izuku's life even more of a hell. The black-haired man sighed and shook his head. It was better to put that aside and concentrate on what he had in his hands now. The lack of light was worrying. Surely for Izuku he had already run out of energy. Unfortunately for him, he did not have time to observe it and study it because of how busy he was these days. So moving again in his room by means of his chair. Now he was at his work table/desk, where he would put the device before taking a tool. It was a sharp tip where some tiny electrical rays were seen. A device that he believed allows energy to be transferred to devices without direct or indirect access to its power source. He moved it to the disc before touching the symbol of the fragmented red hourglass. The effect was instantaneous. Red electricity emerged from the area he touched, before traveling through his device, which released black smoke, before the electricity reached Izuku's hand. The black-haired man backed away as quickly as he could, feeling his hand go numb, but that was the least of his worries as he watched his hand begin to mutate. The skin quickly turned into black stone, almost like obsidian, before cracks appeared on it and fire made its way through them. Quickly, from his fingers to the middle of his forearm, his hand was plasma, fire, with parts of volcanic rock but being mostly fire. He opened his eyes as wide as he could to see his hand. He tried to touch it, but the heat radiating from it prohibited him. But something completely caught his attention to this. The hand was identical to the hand of one of Benjamin's transformations. It was at that moment that his hand was returning to normal, the fire disappearing and the rock disintegrating based on red energy, before disappearing completely and showing Izuku's human hand. With his sleeve closed burned and with still residues of red electricity around him that disappeared shortly after. He breathed heavily from the surprise he was experiencing, but a smile formed on his lips, before seeing the device on his table again. Scene change. Izuku was making several notes, sitting in his chair and leaning on his work table/desk. On the other side of the room, connected to several more devices on the floor, the disc was being analyzed. He managed to find out that it was emitting a weak signal, apart from the fact that the clock symbol worked as a direct input to what was supposed to be its operating system or power source. Speaking of which, he stopped in his writing and turned to look at the device that now had a ring around its circumference, this same one replacing the previous tip, constantly transferring energy, the source of this being about 5-car batteries that he took out of the dumpster and that he charged, taking a little energy from the other apartments in the area. How did he get them all to his room without anyone noticing? That was a question that would never have an answer. The same disc-shaped device was wrapped in a small translucent dome-like plastic, but even more resistant, which prevented the escape of electricity that it constantly emanates. Next to it, a lightning rod that absorbed the energy released and sent it through some cables, which began to burn at the moment of receiving the energy. The black-haired man sighed tired and annoyed before taking a remote control and pressing a button that deactivated the transmission of energy to the disc. Instantly the rays disappeared. Izuku got up from his place and walked to his object of study, pushing aside the translucent dome, before taking the lightning rod, slightly burned. Then he turned his gaze to the burned cables and took them with annoyance. I have to get conductors with greater resistance. Apart from that, the ones I was already using also burned. Maybe an amp dissipator would also work, or a capacitor resistant enough to later use several resistors in a new path to reduce the current load and be able to analyze the energy on my computer. A better transformer would also work for me. The one I have is already damaged and is not of a very decent quality. Izuku thought out loud before sighing heavily. If only he had access to Benjamin's device, this would be much easier. But no. When he asked if he could analyze it, he was not allowed to and rejected him in a somewhat aggravated and offensive manner, which confirmed any suspicions that Izuku had about the brown-haired boy and the device on his wrist. Now that he thought about it better, the energy leak from the device was due to the fragmented clock symbol. Changing it could help him contain the energy, but it would prohibit him from analyzing it when he expelled it. He still had no way to directly access the device and its system. He just sighed again. This really was a big mess for him. He saw the hourglass symbol. That defect caused him many headaches, but the more he saw it, the more he thought. Until a memory came to his mind. Flashback. Where will Gwen be? Izuku thought, looking for his best friend, but without finding her. He was in the academy, walking through the hallways, until he passed a window where he heard a beep. Looking through it without being noticed, he saw Benjamin Tennyson and his friend, Gwen Tennyson, both looking at the device that the first had on his wrist. Ben, don't be playing with a watch. The brunette scolded the younger, who shrugged. I just want to see if I can get a new transformation, he said as if nothing, at that moment turning the dial of the Omnitrix. It was at that moment that, between turns, the front of the dial opened, revealing a circuit of green lines. Wow! Was the only thing Ben said, amazed and surprised by what Ben achieved. Gwen exclaimed angrily and looking sternly at her cousin. What? Isn't it like something happened? Ben complained unconcerned. But at that moment the device on his wrist began to release green electricity, which scared the two of them. Ben had no effect whatsoever, but Gwen was injured, this noticed by the boy next to him and the one he was watching. Ben quickly turned the dial, causing her to return to normal. I told you not to play with him, Gwen said angrily with the green eye, who raised his hands in defense. I'm sorry, I didn't know this would happen, Ben said, embarrassed. Gwen just sighed heavily and with annoyance, before pulling the less brown-haired boy's ear. Izuku heard enough and turned around. He had seen and heard enough. End of flashback. He looked at the device in his hands, staring at the fragmented red clock symbol. What had happened with Ven gave him an idea to access it, but how would he do it? He had no way to turn the dial, nor any other way to access its functions, like the button that Ben's device has next to it. Izuku despaired a little, but shook his head. It was not the time to give up or sin in despair. He saw the dial in his hand in a better way. It has a more refined shape, and the metal it is made of is more polished. He opened his eyes in surprise to realize something. I'm a fool, I put this device on the same level as Tennyson's, but I couldn't be more wrong. This one is superior to his. He approaches his table where he leaves the dial before taking his notebook and starting to write down. In words always, Tennyson's is an outdated version, while mine is an updated one, a superior one. It would be like comparing old Nokias with modern phones. The ones now have a better interface, access, and technology. Maybe the way to access it is not one with a code to turn or buttons, but a touch one. If so, it would be most correct to repair the front symbol it has. That has to be the touch screen. Izuku whispered, writing in his notebook. It's enough to be heard, but not enough to be attended to. But he realized something. He turned quickly and went to a drawer with underwear, from where he took out a wad of money. Let's see, if my calculations do not fail me, 60% of my savings will be enough to be able to buy a disassembled and editable touchscreen, Izuku said with a smile, before standing up and taking a jacket on his chair before leaving his room. As he walked through his house, someone suddenly stopped him. Oni-chan. Kane called in a low voice and stood behind him. Izuku was confused. He didn't understand why she was talking to him at this moment, especially since they returned from camp. She hadn't looked at him at any time, even when she was bothering him at school. I'm busy with things of utmost importance, was his cold and emotionless response, before opening the door of his house and leaving and then closing it. Leaving on the other side of the door Akane, surprised by how he had spoken to her. Some time later. Damn, I had to take my train ticket, Izuku said heavily and tired, as he walked home with a bag in his hands. It took him longer than he expected. Really, he didn't expect his favorite store to be closed today. It wasn't a problem, he just had to wait until tomorrow. But impatience got the better of him, and he decided to go to another store. Unfortunately, it was on the other side of the area of the city where he lived. Apart from that, once there, when his time came, he had to wait in line to buy what he had gone to. But he already had it. Although it wasn't the color, Izuku got a touch screen. Thanks to his knowledge and some tools he had, he could modify its shape to match the hourglass-shaped entrance. Looking at the time on his watch on his right wrist, he realized it was already quite late. Or well, for the one that his parents wouldn't be there tonight. He only eavesdropped on them, that they wanted to strengthen their bond, fan the flame of passion, and that they would say that they would be busy with their work for him and Kane. Well, he didn't know what that meant, and he couldn't care less, as long as it had nothing to do with him. Izuku entered his home once he was in front of the door, and went to his room. Where once there he took a small box out of the bag that he opened, and from there he took out a touch screen. He went to his work table/desk and put it there, before taking his tools and putting it in front of the dial. He noticed the clock symbol, and how it would be easy to remove due to its fragmented state. I just needed a drill and some metal bits to be able to break the glass further and remove the pieces. Once that was done, he was met with the same sight he had seen on Benjamin's watch, an interface of lines, in this case colored red and dull, evidently due to the lack of power. He then turned his attention to the touch screen after having scrapped away the main front part of the device, which was set aside in favor of not getting in the way of the next job, which was to adapt the shape of the screen to the now exposed part of the dial. A job that didn't take him long. With some tools that he got or made on his own, he did it, of course, taking the measurement of the affected area and giving it to the screen. He would have liked it to be red, but he didn't find anything similar to that. He also had to improve the quality of the screen. Although he bought higher quality, he wouldn't trust it too much. The good thing is that he did have those materials. Once that was finished, he already had everything he needed, and he only needed to carry out the final repair. The two pieces fit perfectly, something that was expected of him. He inevitably smiled with pride. Before staring at the result and blinking, he had to try now to transfer energy to it. It took him some time to get everything ready. he didn't want it to die by accident. Now that he thought about it, why did he do this? Well, he quickly remembered the answer. This fell from space, a subject of great value and importance to him, also of interest. Another factor was his curiosity, and another completely separate one, the adrenaline to do something that was surely prohibited and dangerous. Yes, perhaps so many blows to the head were already affecting his sense of survival and self-preservation. He blamed Katsumi and her explosions for that, as well as his other classmates who beat him up, and so did Sister Kane. But that didn't matter now. He placed the device in the middle of his room, being surrounded by the translucent and electricity-insulating dome. Going out, through and in through the dome, the dial was connected to the car batteries. Izuku held the remote in his right hand and put on some welding goggles. Click. He pressed the button on the remote without thinking. The current traveled through the wires and reached the device with the ring around it. The reaction was evident, as well as surprising and astonishing to Izuku. The black ring around the clock symbol glowed red, the black touch screen began to glow red, before beginning to be disintegrated, being replaced by a new one, completely red. The light emanated from there and began to envelop the room. Seconds passed. Izuku had turned off the power and brought his hands to his eyes. Even the light had affected him through his welding glasses. But he quickly recovered his sight. The good thing is that it was only mild and he had already calmed down. But he looked at what he had in front of him and smiled, feeling great satisfaction and adrenaline running through his veins. He pulled the insulating and protective dome out of the way, and held the dial in his hands, watching as lines formed a moving circle on the black circle / side of the face and side of the hourglass symbol, as if it were charging something. That was another detail that caught his attention. The clock symbol was shining with a life gem now, but without being annoying or harmful to the eye at first glance. Ultimatrix reboot starting. A woman's voice came from the hourglass symbol, which caught his attention. Activation of the main power source has begun. Estimated time 7 days, 12 hours, 40 minutes, 25 seconds. A big smile from Izuku couldn't help but emerge between his lips and caused the black-haired man to jump victorious. He had done it! Although the waiting time was somewhat annoying and unexpected, he had done it. With this done and already satisfied, he could wait that estimated time. Although it did not take away the slight concern of what he would get once the power source was activated. But that was something that the Izuku of the future would have to find out. The next day. No one could take away his smile. He had made the most important achievement in his life, apart from having started reading at age 2, also talking and walking. His life would have been worse if it was added if he did not achieve that, and that he had no desire. Things were clear. But those were small things with what he had achieved yesterday. Deku. An irritating voice reached his ears, but he did not care. He was still involved in the possible studies he could do on the device he found in the camp. Deku. Once again, the voice called him, but he did not care. Now that he thought about it, it was wrong to continue calling it a device like that. Now he knew its name, and that is Ultimatrix. Interesting name to tell the truth. He had to find out its functions once its power source was activated at 100%. He was sure of one, and that was the ability to transform, because of how he saw Benjamin do it with his DKU. Again that voice resonated in his head, a hateful, horrible, destructive voice, total shit for him. What do you want now? He asked, although he demanded more angrily and seriously, being interrupted in his thoughts about his greatest achievement, speaking in a loud voice to a stunned Katsumi who went blank. Oh shit, he had screwed up big time. Although seeing the state of the ashen-haired girl, he still had a way to escape before suffering his wrath. Boom! Some time later. Pie. He heard the beeps of a heart monitor. The scent of medicine was palpable in the air. He opened his eyes, or rather his left eye. He could notice the lack of vision and perspective from his right side. He brought his right hand to that area, noticing the bandages that wrapped the right area of his face. Analyzing the place better, he noticed the doctor in front of him, who looked back at him. I see that you woke up young Midoriya, now stay dash. The doctor said, but would be interrupted. My right eye, is it recovering or dash? He didn't dare to finish the sentence. but only anguish filled him as he watched the doctor look away bitterly. Unfortunately, the accident you had in your chemistry class almost made you lose a large part of the right side of your face, but thanks to the help of several healing quirks to another living being and recovery girl, you will have no problem with that. Even with that in mind, the scar is nothing more than a line. As if it were a cut from a big bear's claw, better than these scars actually look, but, even with all that, we did not manage to save your right eye. It was the one that received the most damage, and only some fragmented nerves remained, or simply a soup of burnt organic tissue of a ridiculously small amount of mass and volume," explained the doctor seriously and not wanting to look Izuku in the eye. The black-haired man tightened his grip on the sheets and looked down in shock. Without paying attention to his surroundings, he didn't notice that a nurse had come in and started talking to the doctor. The green-haired man's mind only echoed one word. Accident, accident, accident. Accident, 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 accident. Not a shit, Izuku whispered, unheard, with a blank look. That hitch was silent, that wretch, bastard, that beast, that animal, that devolved ape. Izuku thought, staying calm outside, but in his mind a total mess. Hatred and anger, both emotions moved back and forth, generating words that couldn't even reflect a little of what you really feel. Sorry to bother you, young Midoriya, but you have someone who wants to see you, said the doctor, calling his attention. Izuku looked up, looking as calm as possible. This only unsettled the doctor. Yes, who would it be? Asked Izuku without any humor or emotion. The doctor swallowed silently, feeling more uncomfortable. As I understand it, it is your aunt. Her name is Mitsuki Bakugo, and she came to see how you are. The doctor's answer was the calmest he could give. At that moment the door opened, revealing a beautiful ashen-haired woman, with a heart-attack body, blonde eyes, wearing a lilac robe, white nightgown, purple skirt and black heels. Silence fell in the room when Izuku and Mitsuki's gaze met and connected with each other, or well, semi-connected, due to the lack of half of the black-haired man's vision. Well, I'll leave you for a moment. I have to look for your tests, young Midoriya, said the doctor before leaving the two alone. What can I help you with, Miss Bakugo? Izuku asked suddenly and instantly after the doctor had left. Mitsuki's gaze only had anguish and worry. I just came to see how you are and apologize. I didn't imagine that any of this would happen, Mitsuki said with anguish. What didn't you think was going to happen when I asked you to tell your daughter's animal to leave me alone, and you just told me that she liked it, and was trying to get my attention? Izuku said coldly and emotionlessly, but the way he called Katsumi only bothered her. Don't call my daughter that way, Mitsuki claimed angrily. And what do you want me to call her? He asked excitedly, disconcerting the woman. She had never seen him act so aggressively, not even in an aggressive way. Just look how that animal left me. I don't have my right eye anymore, Izuku claimed now, although the more he spoke, the more his voice broke and tears threatened to come out of his left eye. The black-haired man could only breathe heavily and bring his left hand to his, now, only eye to avoid reaching him. At the boy's change of attitude, Mitsuki tried to get closer to him. Deku-kun, she said, trying to comfort him, bringing her hand to his back, but a slap pushed her away, seeing how Izuku was now beginning to cry for real. Don't touch me and don't call me for that bucking insult that your wild ape daughter made me. I don't want your bucking pity, regret or begging. I don't want anything more than for you to get out of here to continue worshipping that disgusting animal that you have for a daughter, Izuku said with hatred and anger while crying from helplessness. Izuku, calm down, Mitsuki begged, approaching and trying to calm him down, but he struggled. Don't call me by my name, you are nothing to me, breeder of wild animals. Get away from me and go away once and for all, Izuku said with anger and hatred, pushing her. Normally this treatment towards her or someone in her family would make her angry, but she couldn't blame the child, who to me from the state he was in was obviously not a reasonable and emotionally and sentimentally stable one. What is the problem here? The doctor asked, entering the room, accompanied by a guard. It's this woman. She is not my aunt at all. She is a complete stranger, Izuku said while crying and looking with hatred at Mitsuki, who became nervous. And it's not that, I just wanted to see how he was and dash. Mitsuki said nervously but would be interrupted. Lady, get out of here right now or we will force you to do it. Perhaps the child is a Quirkless, but I am not like the other doctors who do not care about this type of patient, so either you leave voluntarily or brute force will be used, said the doctor seriously and severely. But Mitsuki tried to refute, but she saw a flash that caught her attention. Looking better, the guard who accompanied the doctor had his eyes shining in neon, which scared her. Fine, I will withdraw, said Mitsuki, discouraged and distressed, realizing that she could not do anything. Meanwhile, outside the room and leaning against the wall, sitting on the floor and hugging her legs, Katsumi Bikugu listened to everything attentively and without missing anything, before lowering her head and sobbing could be heard. End. Chapter 2, Ultimatrix. Narrator POV. Izuku sighed as he stretched a white medical patch over his right eye a little. At his side was Gwen, who watched the doctor in front of Izuku attentively. Well, young Midoriya, you can go home now. We are not going to keep you here anymore, although I have to admire you. Your recovery was amazing, although this can be explained by the residual effects of the healing quirks used on you, said the doctor in front of the black-haired man with green highlights, while smiling slightly at him. Okay, thank you for everything, sir, said Izuku, nodding to the man who did the same. It was a pleasure. I hope to see you again on different terms, said the doctor, disheveled. He stroked the black-haired man's hair, who snorted annoyed. But apart from the annoyance, he only felt embarrassed when he heard Gwen laugh lightly. After that, the two of them left the hospital room. But when they left, the doctor instantly took out a phone and dialed a number. Hello, Shigaraki-sama. I found a new piece to use. Yes, it's quirkless. It will be easy to manipulate it, the doctor said on the phone, while looking at the door. Meanwhile, outside the hospital were Gwen and Izuku, looking ahead, noticing that no one had come for the black-haired man. Do you want to do something today? Gwen asked suddenly. The black-haired man thought about it for a few moments. Calculating, it had been 7 days since the Ultimatrix started to reset. There were only a few hours left, so he didn't see anything wrong with spending quality time with his friend. Yeah, how about we go get some milkshakes? Izuku offered with a smile. The brunette nodded happily and took the black-haired man's hand. Let's go, she said excitedly, pulling him a little. Some time later, Izuku found himself in front of his house, sighing in annoyance at being there once again. He just opened the door and entered, closing the door behind him. He instantly heard his mother sobbing in the kitchen. It was no mystery to him why she was crying. Mitsuki Bikugu, her best friend and childhood friend, had moved away and saying that they had to separate. She cut off all communication with Izuku Midoriya. Izuku assumed it was because of the guilt he felt for everything that had happened, preferring to get away from the Midoriya family before anything else happened. Although Izuku assumed it was also because of the fact that Izuku had the evidence to accuse his entire family to the police. One more reason why they had moved and cut off communication with Izuku's family. Izuku, called a voice in the kitchen, sounding at the same time with Inko's sobs. The black-haired man with green highlights only sighed silently in annoyance. He already knew what was going to happen now. Yes, father? Izuku asked, entering the kitchen and receiving the angry and serious look of Hisashi Midoriya, his biological father, and pro-hero entering the top 60. We need to talk, said the man, comforting his crying wife. Is it about the Bikuga family? Izuku asked monotonously. The older black-haired man just snorted at his tone. You are grounded for messing with Mitsuki's daughter and causing all this. Go to your room now, then we'll talk about what your punishment will be like, Hisashi said seriously, preferring to leave the subject aside now when Inko hugged him and cried on his chest. As if it were my ass, that wild animal lied again. Besides, it's not just my fault, you're also guilty, you always graped her with your gaze. Izuku thought, annoyed. He just nodded at what his father said and turned around to go to his room. He didn't have time to waste on stupid things about his family or some other person he didn't like. He had more important things to do. It didn't take long for her to reach her room, passing by a Kane who tried to get her attention, but a cold look and her current state silenced her instantly, and made her back down on her plans. He opened the door to his room and entered, sighing with relief and then smiling. He really loved this place. No one bothered him to his surprise and he could do whatever he wanted. Beep. He blinked in confusion. He didn't know what that beep was until he remembered the Ultimatrix and smiled happily. He walked over to his desk/work table, where the Ultimatrix dial was located, the black circle around the hourglass glowing red, with a white line spinning and running around its circumference. "I see you've been waiting for me," Izuku said, taking the Ultimatrix dial in his left hand before looking at it better. Beep, beep after beep was the only thing the Ultimatrix did. Tired of that moment of sound, Izuku got tired of making suspense and brought his hand to the hourglass, touching the middle of it. Nothing happened. Curious, he kept his finger and was surprised to see how a kind of wave was reflected in the clock symbol, and it shined a little more. The Ultimatrix has completely rebooted. "Finally," said Izuku, smiling happily. "Identify yourself." The voice of the Ultimatrix called him, surprising and disorienting the black-haired man a little. "How?" Izuku asked, confused. "Login." The voice only demanded the same thing again, to which the black-haired man sighed in annoyance. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," Izuku said calmly. "How did you get me?" the Ultimatrix's voice asked monotonously. Izuku blinked a few times, but realized the path these questions would take. "Okay, I understand how this is. You ask and will ask several things, but keep this in mind, I will ask too." "What are you?" Izuku said seriously, asking with great interest. "I will respond when my questions are answered." That only caused a sigh from the black-haired man. "Well, I found you in the forest. You disappeared from the atmosphere and killed several people when you landed. After that, I brought you home and took it upon myself to repair you and make you 100% functional," Izuku explained calmly and seriously. Then he looked at the Ultimatrix that beeped before answering. "I'm not 100%. The Ultimatrix functions are damaged. Only the main functions of the Omnitrix work. The Ultimatrix capabilities would only cause a degradation in the system and cause my software to be damaged or even deleted." "Are you an artificial intelligence apart from the Ultimatrix?" Izuku asked, confused and curious. "Yes, I'm only installed in the Ultimatrix to avoid any failure, fix bugs or manipulate it with the safety of Mr. Albedo, my creator and portcarrier notice. It was detected that the user information was lost." "What?" Izuku asked, confused by the spontaneous notice. "I continue to analyze the Ultimatrix. I detect lack of information and lost stored data. A prototype version of the Omnitrix was detected." "Omnitrix Tennyson's device," Izuku said, frowning seriously. "Tennyson, it doesn't matter. My creator and bearer Albedo has died. My existential function no longer has meaning." "And what if I'm your new carrier?" Izuku asked with a small smile. "What are your motives?" "I just want to get to know you, know what you are, where you come from, know more about the stars. Apart from that, the idea of having power is not bad, if not satisfactory," Izuku responded with a lively smile. About 3 beeps were heard from the Ultimatrix before he spoke again. "Your physical condition is pitiful. You are missing your right eye organ and you are only 10 years old." "Thanks for the compliments," Izuku said with annoyance and sarcasm. "But you possess a great intellect, superior to that of your species. Apart from possessing great adaptive capacities and great potential, I will help you if you achieve my goal of existence." "And what would that goal be?" Izuku asked with interest. "Surpass the Omnitrix. But my creator Albedo never achieved that. The Ultimatrix lacks several functions to achieve that. But I have something that can reward him." A hologram projected from the Ultimatrix dial and showed another Omnitrix with data around it. Information and data were lost, but there is a record of what was shown by the Omnitrix, so what was lost is not important. The most powerful and important functions of the Omnitrix were successfully recovered and protected. Izuku watched the hologram of the Omnitrix with interest and amazement. This was all really interesting and amazing. He couldn't help but let a fanatical smile appear on his lips. "I want the Ultimatrix to match or surpass the Omnitrix." "It's a deal," Izuku said with a smile. Another beep emerged from the Ultimatrix before the eye and it spoke. Okay, from now on I am your property, Izuku Midoriya, my new carrier. I have already analyzed your DNA and stored and registered it as my new user. Well, I'm happy with that, Izuku said with a cheerful smile. I'm pleased with your joy. We have to start with the main thing, a base for the use of the Ultimatrix. The only thing you have is the core. The AI voice explained monotonously, to which Izuku would understand. How would one make one? Izuku asked curiously. Just get something basic. I'll take care of adapting it to the Ultimatrix core. This is a function to be able to repair it quickly and have it up and running quickly, to then be improved when you have more time and materials. The AI explained and Izuku smiled happily. This wouldn't take long from what he was understanding. Well, explain to me and tell me how to make a base, to use the Ultimatrix. I'll take care of recreating it, Izuku said, going to his worktable/desk and left the Ultimatrix dial on it, before taking his diary and a pencil to start writing down. Do you at least have the resources to create the base for the Ultimatrix? The AI's question only made Izuku gulp and look slightly nervous. No, I don't really have it, Izuku said somewhat nervously, and pulling on the collar of his shirt a little. Pathetic. Izuku just snorted at the monotony of the device, until he realized something. Now that I realize, you didn't tell me what the Ultimatrix is exactly, and also, what is the Omnitrix? Izuku asked seriously. He saw how the black circle around the clock showed the moving lines, as if it was charging something, until it disappeared and the Ultimatrix made a beep. Omnitrix, one of Azmatha's most powerful creations, if not the most powerful. It provides the ability to transform its user into different alien forms, this with the intention that the user can understand the different extraterrestrial races. Bingo, I guess right that you are from space and that you have that function, Izuku said, animated and victorious. Please allow me to continue without interrupting me, the AI said in annoyance. Izuku had the dignity to at least feel embarrassed. Sorry, Izuku said. A low beep came from the Ultimatrix before the AI spoke again. Continued Ultimatrix, device whose intention was to be a better version of the Omnitrix, stolen in beta stage by Albedo and being semi-finished by him. Allows to force the evolution of alien DNA and become that result, creating a simulation where the selected species will have to survive for millions of years and in the harshest conditions for their abilities. In an update and improvement whose data was lost. The Ultimatrix increased the years from millions to trillions, apart from, instead of just concentrating on the abilities, now the selected DNA sample forced to fight for the survival of oneself, fighting against others of the same species, predators, and concentrating on attacking them exactly in their weaknesses and simplifying their abilities. Obtaining the best version of the alien, this function was separated from the Ultimatrix, and the last update was called Hypermatrix/Hypertrix, but out of habit it was still called Ultimatrix. Although at one time it was a stabilizer for the form of my creator Albedo. Izuku blanked out at the information he had been given. He only had one thing on his mind. That Albedo became another idol apart from Almight. The next day. Look, what happened to him? Why does he have a medical patch on his right eye? Asked a student watching Izuku from a distance, arriving at the academy. I don't know, maybe did she lose it with Katsumi's explosion? Suggested a student who was arriving and who heard her. Speaking of her, I heard that her mother changed her school and that's why she doesn't come anymore. Said a boy with a quirk that allowed him to stretch his fingers. Hump, it's all that damn Deku's fault. Said a girl with disgust seeing Izuku and how he was going to his class. Meanwhile, Izuku was about to open the door to his classroom. But at that moment someone intercepted him. Izuku, how are you? Gwen greeted her friend who smiled fondly at her. Hello Gwen-chan, I'm fine, and you? The black-haired man returned the greeting, seeing how she nodded. I'm fine and so are you. But I have to ask you something, can we go out after school? Asked Gwen with a smile, although Izuku noticed the sadness in her eyes. Of course, why wouldn't I have a date with you? Izuku said with a soft smile that was returned by Gwen. If you're right, Gwen said with the same smile. Some time later. Are you ready? Gwen asked, leaving the school and finding a nervous Izuku due to her sudden appearance. Yes, I am, the black-haired man replied, and she nodded before taking him by the hand and pulling him, under the judging gaze of the other students. It didn't take them long to get to where Gwen wanted to bring the black-haired man, who raised an eyebrow. A festive event? Izuku asked, confused, as he saw how the area looked more like an amusement park than a traditional festival of his culture. Gwen just shrugged. I heard there was one opening in the area, so I did some research and decided to bring you here. Gwen replied calmly and began to walk forward. Izuku did the same and stood next to her. And what about Benjamin-san? I heard around that you had to spend more time with him. Izuku said sarcastically. The brunette just shook her head. The idiot got sick the other day, didn't you notice? He didn't come to the academy today. Gwen answered, sighing at the mention of her cousin. Izuku just snorted to see that his little joke didn't work the way he wanted. Well, I understand. He turns to look around, seeing the different games, both traditional and mechanical or technological. And which one do you want to go first? Izuku asked curiously. Gwen smiled and held his arm. I was here this morning looking around the place from afar. I already have an idea of what to do, Gwen said before pulling the black-haired man back, who chuckled. He wouldn't lie, he thought it was cute to see his friend acting this way. It was another thing to admit it. The afternoon had been quite fun for both children about to enter adolescence. This amusement park-like event had plenty of games, and both children found them interesting. They were entertained by what they saw and used. It turned out that Gwen had no planned tone and only had the first thing she wanted to play. From a shooting game to a game of throwing the ball against the bench so that someone would fall into the water. Unfortunately, if someone went in pairs, one of them had to be in the place of the person who would fall into the water. After that, Izuku needed a change of clothes. He didn't like the mini roller coaster either. He wasn't a fan of heights. Even more so when he heard a screw come loose. Unfortunately, it was the only one, and until the end he was afraid of falling to the ground. They continued with more games like the hammer game, where Gwen ended up winning a stuffed animal to use her quirk on her body and enhance it. They continued with more games, where both had a lot of fun. But Izuku never took his attention off the brunette, still noticing the sadness in her. This seemed more like a date. Izuku thought, walking through a park. Gwen was hugging him by his left arm and resting her head on the black-haired man's shoulder. Izuku looked at the stuffed animal in his right hand, a panda bear between pink and purple. He then turned his gaze slightly and saw Gwen holding a red panda, raccoon, stuffed animal that was redder than a real one would be, and its eyes seemed to be made of a phosphorescent material in the dark. Izuku assumed that because of how they slowly glow as the sun sets. I really had a lot of fun, Gwen said cheerfully, holding Izuku's arm. Likewise, but I want to tell you something. Well, ask something, Izuku said, stopping slowly. Gwen looked at him confused for a few moments. What would it be? Izuku asked curiously. He just sighed to calm down. I managed to notice your sadness. Is something wrong? Izuku asked worriedly, although he didn't show it much, but Gwen noticed it perfectly. Another thing about his quirk was the ability to feel the emotions or feelings of others easily. She just sighed and smiled sadly, looking down. You noticed? Well, it was something to be expected. After all, you are a genius, Gwen said sadly, but still with her smile. Thanks for the compliment, but don't change the subject, Izuku said seriously. She just sighed and looked him in the eyes. Well, I'll tell you, in fact, that's what this exit was for too, Gwen said. Izuku blinked, confused at what she said. What do you mean? Izuku asked, confused. Izuku, my parents and my uncles were talking for a while, and he lets out a heavy sigh and looks into Izuku's eyes sadly. They decided that we would return to the United States, Gwen said sadly. Izuku just stood there blankly. 1 year and 8 months later. Well, it's the best you could do with how little humanity has advanced and your limited resources. The AI spoke from the Ultimatrix dial in a monotone, watching Izuku finish welding a metal piece on the table. The black-haired man with green highlights leaned back, showing what he had been working so hard on. A wrist device, where it had a cylindrical input at the top in the middle, on the sides 2 metal plates with 2 off-blue LEDs, 1 on each plate. Made of 2 silver metals. I'm done, it's my best work so far, although it took me 8 months to finish it. Izuku said with a satisfied smile and looking in admiration at the wrist device on the table. It's the most advanced thing I've created so far. Well, I'm surprised how little time it took you to make it, or even with my help, it would take another person years to create something like this with the few resources you had. But let's leave that aside and I'll continue to elaborate later, now you know what to do. Thank you, without you I would have never achieved it, said Izuku with a happy smile, before taking the device he created and putting it on the wrist of his right hand. It was somewhat uncomfortable, he wouldn't deny it, but he could bear it. The next thing he did was take the dial of the Ultimatrix which deployed its core, a black cylinder with red lines. Izuku would be lying if he said he wasn't anxious or nervous. But he managed to calm down and have the determination to finish his job. He inserted the Omnitrix core into the wrist socket. The result was instantaneous. The silver color of the device changed to a metallic red, while the other silver color remained, along with the 2 plates on the sides, whose LEDs lit up and changed from blue to red. Izuku smiled with great vigor and raised his left arm, seeing his finished work, as well as his greatest achievement so far. I finally finished it, now, it's time to see what my progress is capable of, Izuku said, beginning to turn the dial of the Ultimatrix that released some beeps, before projecting a hologram. You can only transform for about 10 minutes before returning to normal, the Ultimatrix functions are still blocked. The AI informed him through the Ultimatrix. Izuku nodded at that. That doesn't matter. The core of the Ultimatrix rises once the dead alien DNA is selected. This is enough for now, said Izuku, pressing the core and being enveloped by a red light. In Izuku's place was found a humanoid figure composed of grayish plants, with red petals as his fingers, a larger petal on his head and a completely black face. His eyes glowed in neon, but he had a scar above his right eye, which was missing. 2 lines appeared on his chest in a phosphorescent green color, with mud marks on his forearms and feet. The Ultimatrix symbol was positioned on his chest. This is enough for now, because I already have the power that I originally wanted, said Izuku. A ball of fire lit up in the palm of his hand, while a right eye was forming in its proper place. Chapter 3. Improvised Improvement. Narrator POV. Beep, beep, beep. Izuku turned into an alien. Swampfire was enveloped by a red light before returning to his human form. It seems that he ran out of power, Izuku said, looking at the Ultimatrix, the hourglass flickering on and off. As I understand it, I have to wait 5 minutes before it turns back on, and it seems that its AI is also off, said Izuku, seeing that the artificial intelligence was not speaking to him. Well, I have plenty of time even with that. I can start with the future updates for the Ultimatrix. Then now that I think about it, I have to give it a name. Calling it AI or artificial intelligence is already annoying after so much time, Izuku muttered thoughtfully, although he looked annoyed at the end. After that he sighed and walked to his worktable/desk, where he sat down and took a pencil and began to write and draw some plans as well as designs. Time moved faster as he was entertained and heard how the Ultimatrix released a beep, and its light turned completely red again. I need more materials, Izuku said suddenly and thoughtfully, looking around the room, seeing that he didn't have what he needed. Now we have no problems with taking materials from the trash. Now you have several transformations that will help you convert that trash into high-quality technology, even superior to current human technology. That sounds great, and by the way, I was thinking about it, and I would like to give you a name. Calling you AI or artificial intelligence has become annoying, Izuku said with a calm and quiet smile as he continued writing. I already have a name, it's Albedo.exe. The AI responded calmly and without giving much importance to the subject. Izuku had a poker face to know what the exe means. That's your program or file name. I mean a more personal name. Even if you are a machine, I would like to have a closer relationship if you can put it in some way, said Izuku, continuing what he was doing. I don't understand your reasoning. Izuku just sighed at the AI's statement before speaking again. You should update yourself to possess a little more common sense. But anyway, I'm doing the name thing so that all this isn't awkward, it's just a whim of mine as a human teenager. Izuku said, frowning slightly. Fine, call me whatever, after all, I'm your property right now. Izuku smiled at what the AI said and instantly started thinking about it. He wasn't good at naming things, it was a fact that he had very clear tenets, so something simple was fine, something comfortable, and something that the AI surely wouldn't complain about. Albedo, since your file is albedo.exe, I will remove the exe. Albedo can be used for both genders, and apart from that you would be like a junior albedo, that name being of your creator who is dead right now, so I doubt he would mind me using his name on you and it would be a tribute to him, said Izuku with a smile. Okay. Izuku smiled a little more in satisfaction at hearing that from the AI, the Nego. I was pleased to hear that from Albedo. Some time later. Well, here we are, Izuku said, standing on a beach that served as a garbage dump. It was nighttime and the waves crashed against the shore, giving the black-haired boy a feeling of tranquility. I would say that humans are extremely harmful, but I would be lying. There is a much more harmful alien race, and the last thing recorded about them is that they were already on their 18th planet, about to abandon it and looking for another to contaminate. Albedo said monotonously and without emotion. Who would have thought that I would feel flattered by an indirect insult to my species? Izuku said sarcastically. Never mind, it's time to get as much trash out of here as possible and upgrade it so we can work with it, Albedo said in her monotonous and emotionless tone. Izuku nodded and began to walk forward while activating the Ultimatrix. He presses it and is enveloped by a red light. Lines of red light emerge from the socket on his right wrist along with a black liquid that begins to completely envelop him. His eyes glow red and join together to then make a space in the middle, forming a circle, now completely enveloped by the black liquid and red lines. Some of these expand while a yellow light is seen on his chest in the shape of a four-pointed star, before being enveloped by a final red flash. In Izuku's place was now a humanoid biomechanical being, black and red in color, with pointed black lines on the red area and identical but red lines on the black areas. It has claws for fingers, with an eye that consists of a ring of red light with a line that goes down to its chest, where there is a hole inwards, where a staircase of orange and yellow merges to show a white core. Mechamorphogalvanic, sample of original malware DNA, a defective mechamorphogalvanic, and after an assassination attempt against it ended up being updated and being superior in every way to the others of its kind. Albedo explained and informed its bearer, who nodded. Yes, I can feel it perfectly, Izuku said, raising his right hand and forming a blaster, before turning it into a laser sword, a ball with plasma spikes, a shooting flank and blades for claws. Don't waste time, said Albedo, although if her tone was monotonous, it sounded more serious to provoke something in its bearer, who seemed to roll his only eye before walking forward. I have all the time in the world, Izuku said, now noticing that he did it in a voice that wasn't his, but he didn't give it any importance. His arms reached out and grabbed an old computer, along with a few discarded computers. He pulled them towards him before enveloping them completely in the liquid metal that was his hands. After that he left them on the ground, fully repaired and upgraded, versions that surpassed the one he had at home by hundreds of times. Ha ha ha, I love this, Izuku said animatedly, before starting to walk and continue taking technology. He even formed 2 more pairs of arms to continue taking more and more. You're upgrading technology for the sake of upgrading. Realize that you have no way to take it home without attracting attention, and you also don't have the space to leave it somewhere, Albedo said to Izuku, who stopped in place. Okay, you're right, Izuku said before returning his body to its original base form, before taking several devices with his hand and absorbing them. I'll take this home. It's strange. I know I can do instantly after transforming, and that helps me a lot. I know I can absorb or even store technology in me, as well as create, modify and update it, among other things. I practically have absolute control over the technology one touch or have on hand. That includes other abilities more. Deku Izuku looking at his left hand, which he closed into a fist before opening it. Beep. But it's up to me how to use them, Izuku said after returning to his human form after a red flash. He just sighed as he looked at the Ultimatrix, whose light flickered on and off. Now, as far as he understood, the stored technology was stored in the malware DNA. So he had nothing to worry about. Although it was already nighttime, the Ultimatrix would be charged in less than 5 minutes now, so if they thought of attacking him, he could defend himself. He just started to leave the beach and began to calmly head towards his house. He now had the technology to improve his future projects. Unfortunately, this was not enough for any improvements to the Ultimatrix. For that he would need more and to repair the power source of the Ultimatrix. He would need more resources than even malware could give him. He just sighed, but inevitably smiled. At least now he had better and superior technology than what he has at home. Doing his projects or inventions now would be much better. He could do them easier, without having to deal with any failure in his tools. They would even be of higher quality. "Help!" someone shouted from an alley. Izuku, out of curiosity and pure instinct, something he didn't know how or when, but that made his legs move. He peeked into the alley, seeing a girl his same age being held against the wall by 2 men. "I understand why I'm out here, but why is she here?" Izuku wondered with his eyes rolled back, before noticing something out of the corner of his eye. A hero. The black-haired man quickly walked towards him, without being noticed by anyone. Once he was next to him, he touched him, getting his attention. "What do you want, brat? I don't have time to waste," said the hero with annoyance, which left Izuku out of place. "There are 2 men and dash," Izuku said, but he would only be pushed by the hero, who snorted annoyed. "Stop bothering me," the hero said before turning around and starting to walk away, leaving an Izuku lying on the ground, who watched him leave in disbelief. "But there's a girl in danger," said Izuku, getting up quickly and going to him to grab him by a cloak he had. "And what do you want me to do?" "I'm not going to do anything if there are no reporters in this area." He struggles to put Izuku aside, but gets annoyed seeing how Izuku doesn't let go. "Now let me go," the hero said, kicking Izuku in the stomach and throwing him to the ground. After that, the hero left the place. Izuku held his stomach in pain, but with an explosion of anger and helplessness on his face. Beep. The Ultimatrix was already charged again. Izuku saw the most powerful weapon that could exist in his world. He just woke up from his sleep and saw the dial that reflected the light of some headlights. Meanwhile, in the alley, the men were beginning to hold the clothes of the crying girl. "How much do you think they will pay us to return her to her family?" said one of the men with a malicious smile. "They will pay whatever we want. After all, we have the daughter of the Yaoyorosis, so we have to move her quickly from here," said the second subject seriously. "I won't let them take them anywhere," said a recorded voice behind them. Turning around, they saw a subject made entirely of light purple crystal, wearing a black suit with a red chest, white pants and black and red boots, above a short-sleeved trench coat where it has white borders, long-tailed red light edges and a ribbon around the waist, white shoulder pads on the sides with red above, and the symbol of an hourglass on the right or left face on the respective shoulder. From behind emerged 2 crystal stakes, and it seems to have a pointed head, due to the shape of the hood with red light edges. His eyes glow neon red and the Ultimatrix symbol would be on his chest. Izuku started walking towards them, turned into Diamond Head. His hands turned into hammers and he prepared to fight. "A hero?" the first subject exclaimed angrily, a hole opened in each of his palms. "No, a vigilante," said the second, turning his fists into rock and creating rock spikes on his knuckles. The 3 of them moved, going against each other. Izuku's left hammer was deflected by the man who threw a punch with great force to Izuku's face. Crack! The fist shattered upon impact with Izuku's face, who took advantage and hit the subject who covered his face with rock with his other arm. But the rock construction was destroyed and his face was hit by Diamond Head's biological crystal. The subject was thrown against a cigar that made a loud noise. The first subject charged against Izuku, and raised his arms towards him. "Sonic Wall," said the criminal, releasing some sonic waves that hit Izuku. Crack, crack, crack. Izuku's body was sent back a few meters as several cracks appeared on his body. He was breathing heavily as fragments and splinters fell from his body. "Ha ha ha, you really are pathetic. Now it is better to end this," said the criminal with a malicious smile and began to walk towards Izuku. He did nothing and just watched as the villain approached. Last words? The villain asked with a psychopathic smile. Yes, you are a fool, said Izuku before hitting the ground with his fist. Instantly a pillar emerged from the ground in front of the subject, hitting the villain against his face and throwing him to the ground unconscious. After that, Diamond had got up from the ground with difficulty, his body regenerating slowly. After that, Izuku began to walk towards the girl, although his unfriendly face, red color and threatening red eyes, as well as the cracks on his body, did not give the girl a good first look. Hey, it's better that dash, Izuku said seriously, but at that moment he would be knocked to the ground with a shock wave. Getting up with difficulty, Izuku turned his gaze, seeing the hero whom he tried to ask for help to save the girl. Izuku only frowned angrily. What are you doing here, you bastard? Izuku said angrily, facing the hero. I just came to stop you, villain, said the hero with a heroic smile. Behind him several reporters/cameramen were recording or taking photos. This is a misunderstanding, I don't dash, Izuku said seriously, but a shock wave threw him back, crashing into a wall. Shut up and face the consequences of your sins, said the hero, who at the same time several men in suits arrived at the place, along with a limousine. Instantly a woman and a man got out of the car, while bodyguards arrived along with several police patrols. Momo, my girl, you had us so worried, said the woman hugging the girl who began to cry on her mother's chest, while her father hugged them both. You better get out of here, Yaoyorosa's family. Me and my heroic companions will take care of this, said the hero, who ignored Izuku. Don't stand by and defend yourself, Albedo said in Izuku's mind. But they are heroes, Izuku thought worriedly, and getting up from the ground, he quickly created a wall that protected him from another shock wave. Unfortunately, a hero approached his side, apparently with a super strength quirk, which is why when he hit Izuku, he flew several meters. Unfortunately, he didn't reach the ground when another shock wave, which cracked his body, lifted him into the air. Ahog! Izuku groaned in pain and writhed in the air. He heard a high-pitched sound, before losing his hearing as a sonic attack hit him, propelling him forward more than 30 meters. Defend yourself, Albedo ordered in Izuku's mind, who tried to get up. But he didn't answer, he just watched as the villain he knocked out earlier walked towards him. Apparently the heroes and other people thought he was just another hero. Finish that bastard who kidnapped my daughter, said Mr. Yaoyorosa seriously. His wife hit him for getting into the scene and saying something like that. More to see how her daughter, Momo Yaoyorosa, only saw this in horror and in a state of shock, unable to react or do anything. Will you really die like this? Pathetic, still believing in heroes, just look at what's happening, Albedo said in Izuku's mind, who just shook his head. This is nothing more than a misunderstanding, I just have to explain the summons and everything will be resolved, Izuku said, getting up and beginning to generate his body. Seeing this, the heroes prepared to attack. Izuku was scared by what he saw he was doing, more so when he saw how the villain raised his arms, so he quickly created a wall in front of him. Boom! The wall was destroyed and the attack hit Izuku, sending him flying backwards. At least run away. In my current state I am not able to provide 100% of the transformation capabilities. Your current form will not last long, and the more time passes and power is lost, your capabilities will decrease, Albedo said monotonously from Izuku's mind. Do you need an update and upgrade for that? Izuku asked seriously, sadly. Yes, but I don't understand what you're trying to get at, said Albedo in monotony. A flash of light blinded everyone in the place when Izuku pressed the dial of the Ultimatrix. When the light disappeared, Izuku was revealed as a galvanic mechamorpho. Attack now, said the hero, who ignored Izuku. In his hands a blue light formed with intensity. But Izuku acted faster. From the eye in his head he launched a powerful laser ray against that hero, who did not have time to react. After that his arms grew larger and longer, before he placed his palms on the ground and a bar on his elbows began to pump, as if turning his arms into drills. The result was swift. The ground was destroyed and rumbled, and the heroes present as guards and some policemen fell to the ground. Bang! The policemen began to shoot at Izuku, who only absorbed the bullets that hit his biomechanical body. Before enveloping himself in a sphere and absorbing the dial of the Ultimatrix inside it, before compressing himself and being now installed in the Ultimatrix. A light illuminated the entire place, blinding everyone. The sound of fire echoed in the place. When they lowered the arms they used to cover themselves, they saw with surprise a being made of magma/volcanic rock and fire whose core is white, going to yellow, orange and ending in red at the end. It has a black vest with a red stripe down the middle. It also has black shoulder pads and the vest and shoulder pads end with a white border. The Ultimatrix symbol is housed in the middle of the chest on the vest. Izuku's flames intensified and he prepared himself. He had no intention of fighting unless he was forced to do so. But he managed to see how a large jet of water was going straight towards him. He just moved his left arm forward and fired a flame that then evaporated the water with absurd ease and continued on its way. Izuku toned who were the ones from the attack, being the heroic couple water hose. The quote became more tense than it already was. The heroes rolled Izuku, while the guards moved the family away. Yorsis of place and the policemen were preparing with their weapons. Let's see how well they withstand the heat, Izuku said as his fire began to glow brighter. Attack! It was not known who had said it, but instantly all the ranged heroes launched their attacks against the Pyronite who smiled. He expelled his accumulated heat in the form of a colossal explosion of fire that reached several heroes, burning them, causing them to scream in pain, even causing others to fall unconscious. The few who were saved were because they moved away in time, or their quirk helped in that. That night the street where they fought burned for more than a full day. Some time later. Damn, it's a good thing I managed to escape through the manhole cover that was on the other street. Now I just have to camouflage myself in the mall and go home, said Izuku, seeing the mall in the distance. While he ran, Lucia agitated. She had been running for a long time. Although she could transform, she didn't want to attract attention right now. She just wanted a place to relax, and that was the mall. Hey, there's a silver lining to all this, Albedo said, the AI now sounding lively instead of monotonous. If you're right. He raises his right arm looking at his wrist. Now without a doubt, I have something better than a quirk, said Izuku with a smile. Now looking at the updated and malware-enhanced Ultimatrix, it looked smaller, although it was still far from the final result. Chapter 4, Goodbye Weakness. Point of view narrator. Your body is in better condition, but you need combat experience, Albedo said in the black-haired man's mind. He was wearing a white sweatshirt with red lines and edges, dark blue jeans and black and white sneakers. Shouldn't we upgrade the Ultimatrix first? Izuku asked curiously, looking at the Ultimatrix and the spontaneous and improvised update he had made to it a week ago. Well, yes, but for that we need a better and larger workplace than the one we already have. But we will do that later. Now you have to improve your physical and psychological side, said Albedo. Izuku sighed and settled. He was currently standing on top of a building, looking out at the starry night sky. The Ultimatrix activated and he pressed the dial, being enveloped in a flash of red light. In it, his body mutated, being enveloped by a green exoskeleton. His eyes disappeared and 4 protuberances emerged from the side of his face, while his clothes were enveloped by the matter of a red galvanic mechamorpho and changed shape, adapting to his alien form. In Izuku's place, a green insected being was found, with a long tail ending in a sharp stinger and wings of a bright marine greenish hue, 4 protuberances as eyes, among them, the Ultimatrix symbol. Izuku transformed into an insectoid, launched himself from the top of the building before starting to fly around the place. He could use another less flashy transformation, but he was not in a place where heroes would pass by so often. That included the fact that his eyes allowed him to see in different directions, which helped him. What exactly are we looking for? Izuku asked curiously to Albedo. Villains, vigilantes, heroes, whatever, as long as you learn to fight better and your Pacific side is completely eliminated, Albedo responded from the Ultimatrix dial. Izuku just got closer before flying back up. At that moment he heard some knocks, turning his gaze and concentrating his 4 eyes on the place, managing to see how a recognized hero was talking to some villains. Are you sure about this? Izuku asked curiously. Sure, now stop being and you can go, Albedo said with annoyance. Izuku just growled under his breath before heading to the place. You should be more careful. You're lucky I managed to knock out the other hero who was accompanying me in time, said the hero to the criminals, some of them carrying boxes into a building. Don't blame us, you didn't say you were coming with someone, said the villain, facing the hero. And you didn't tell me you would come today to deliver the merchandise. I was just planning to patrol this area for a few minutes before going to the next one. If they had warned me, this wouldn't have happened. Now we have very serious problems, said the hero. Seriously, the villain just snorted, annoyed. But before he could speak, they saw a red light above them and heard something fall behind them and break something. They also heard the screams of pain from their ancestors. Let me tell you something, fake generic hero, generic villain selling illegal substances. Nameless is planning to break your bones, since Nameless is still traumatized by what happened last week, and the constant annoyances in his daily life have only increased his anger and rage, said Izuku on top of some unconscious henchmen and broken boxes. He had become an albino humanoid tiger with purple skin, with 2 retractable claws between his knuckles, wearing black pants, with 2 stripe marks on each wall. The end of the pants has a red edge and around the waist has a red belt, with a white piece surrounding it, and in the middle, a black plate with a white edge where the Ultimatrix symbol is located. His eyes glowed neon red, and on the white fur he has several black stripes. No name? The hero asked, confused. GASRRR, do not contradict Nameless, because Nameless will tear off your arms and skin to use as a summer coat, said Izuku with anger and hatred, launching himself to attack them. Head idiot, said the hero, bringing his hands together where a blue light began to generate. Karagag, Nameless recognizes you, you damn fool, you're the fake of the exhibitionist suits, said Izuku with hatred. The hero just snorted and moved his hands forward. Boom! The apoplexian rolled on the ground, avoiding the shockwave launched by the faker. After that, Izuku charged at him, grabbing his face before slamming him against the wall. Now you will see the price of your evil deeds, as Nameless will break your arms, rip them off, and use them as flutes and drumsticks, said the apoplexian, preparing his left claw, but at that moment he would be sent flying by the villain he had ignored. I really wasn't expecting this, but I have to look on the bright side. I'll be able to have my tiger tappy that I always wanted, said the villain, taking a few steps forward, while his skin turned a grayish color. A flash of red light came from Izuku as he pressed the dial on the Ultimatrix. Red energy and red flashes enveloped the alien form of the apoplexian, whose form began to change. His fur contracted and moved at the neck and wrists, while his skin tone turned a grayish blue. 2 pairs of wings were shot out from his back and enveloped him, giving him a panto/hood. His eyes glowed brightly before being enveloped by a bright red light. At Izuku's place, a creepy, humanoid being was found, covered in a blue-gray cloak. It has sharp claws on its hands and feet, with metal rings/bracelets on its wrist around the gray fur it has in that area. The Ultimatrix symbol was not visible, and its eyes glowed neon. Hump, a phenomenon of mutation and transformation. Well, it would be interesting to crush you, said the villain with a smile. The Necrophrygians only expanding their wings, revealing their true appearance, a blue-gray humanoid being, with fur on the wrists and around the neck in gray. The cape, now 4 wings with red neon and 2 antennas with the same red neon, horns/spikes on their shoulders and in grayish spots like the fur all over their body above the blue areas. The Ultimatrix symbol is on their chest and has several red pieces with white fabric on their body in the form of equipment, or clothes. I doubt you'll be able to defeat what can't be touched, Izuku said, letting the man pass through him and become intangible. He returned to a solid state with the villain behind him in a completely frozen state, being encased in resistant ice and in a knockout state. After that, he saw how the hero had already recovered and was preparing to launch a shockwave. But Izuku reacted before and became intangible, avoiding being damaged. At that moment, Izuku began to walk towards the hero, turning his wings and antennae back into their cape and hood form. In desperation, the hero tried multiple times to hurt Izuku, but due to his intangibility, it was impossible. The 2 heard the footsteps approaching. They were the villain's henchmen. The hero sounds confident, but was confused when Izuku sounds too. It was at that moment that the entire environment froze completely. The walls were covered in frost, and then solid ice that covered the doors and ice walls formed at the entrances to the alley. "We have unfinished business," Izuku said coldly. "How many earrings?" asked the hero, confused, until he looked more closely at Izuku and noticed the clock symbol on it, to which the man frowned. "You're the vigilante who saved that stupid brat," said the hero, clicking his tongue angrily. "I see that you do not deny that I saved her, and you only stole the credit, blaming me for everything," Izuku said, closing his eyes and seriously looking at the hero, who was only smiling arrogantly. "So what? It's not like you have any proof of anything. Everyone sees you as a villain, a threat. This is what happens when you try to get attention and steal the admiration of others," said the hero with that smile that seemed repulsive and disgusting to Izuku. "Do you still believe that heroes exist in this hypocritical world?" Albedo asked in Izuku's mind, who only clenched his hands in frustration. "Yes, Almight still exists," Izuku said, which confused the hero. "Hey, you gotta screw loose, oh dash," said the hero, but an icy breath from Izuku left him frozen. After that, Izuku turned around and spread his wings, taking flight and retreating from where he was at high speed. "I see that you still have to mature and see the reality of things, but it doesn't matter, there is still time for that and more things. We will continue with your strengthening of body and mind for a few years before updating the Ultimatrix to have the supreme ones. It would be stupid to give you so much power without training, especially knowledge and the necessary intelligence," Albedo said now from the Ultimatrix, but was ignored by Izuku, who followed her blush. Time skip. Izuku was walking through the streets of his city. Several months had passed since what happened, almost a year. Since that night, Izuku became a vigilante. Although he was mostly known as a villain, unfortunately he always met heroes who came across him when he went out to fight at night, so he defended himself against them and left them injured, as well as the villains he encountered, from drug dealers to black weapon thieves. He was a nuisance to all three main factions: heroes, vigilantes, and villains. He was hated by all of them and mostly seen as a threat. But he didn't care. He only used them to fight and gain more experience and knowledge in the fights, as well as to strengthen his mind to see various horrifying and almost inhuman situations. The black-haired man only shuddered as he remembered what he saw last night. One of the red light districts of the city, at a slave sale event, where millionaires and the richest people in the city and some in the country were there, along with some villains. And what bothered him the most, some heroes who were able to pay the entrance fee and buy whatever they saw there. It was only necessary to mention how a 70-meter giant appeared out of nowhere and began to destroy the surroundings. It was news all over the country, how someone had that growth quirk, although they associated it with the villain, Red Clock, because of how they nicknamed Izuku for the Ultimatrix symbol. Izuku sighed tiredly. He didn't sleep very well last night because of what he had seen. It was unpleasant, and he was slowly starting to become a sociopath. "I don't understand why you still have hope in heroes," said Albedo with annoyance towards the black-haired man, who only shook his head. "There are still good heroes like Almight," Izuku said with a smile, although the dark circles around his eyes only made that smile look like a tired smile. "You continue with the same nonsense, and you only use as an example that hero with an average and simplistic attitude, who says that a smile is enough to fight evil. But that's not the case, Izuku. Smiling is not enough for the villains. Albedo said, now calmer, and tried to reason with the black-haired man, who frowned annoyed the more they listened. "Now no, Albedo. I don't want to discuss this topic right now. I want to get home and sleep," Izuku said with annoyance, raising his right hand and looking at the Ultimatrix that let out an annoyed beep. After that little talk/discussion, Izuku sighed and continued on his way, holding her hair. He needed to sleep, and as quickly as possible. He wanted to leave his problems aside and everything he saw every night he went out. By the way, why did he do it? Was it a responsibility because he knew what the villains and heroes were capable of? A desire to save others without any apparent reason other than to help? Or because he has great power, and with great power comes great responsibility? Perhaps he blames knowing what others do, but because he doesn't want to say anything because no one would believe him and they would end up punishing him, he goes out at night to solve other people's problems. By this time Izuku was passing through a tunnel, looking dejected. It was at that moment that a manhole cover jumped, catching Izuku's attention. I have to escape from him, fast. I have to find somewhere to hide. He notes to Izuku, who looked at him indifferently before smiling. Ha ha ha, brat, what are you doing here? The villain asked, his body composed of a green liquid similar to mud. The only solid thing that could be seen in him were his eyes and teeth. I don't know, Evil Snot, what are you doing in these places? In the first place, why are you going out the door to your home at this hour? You know that people can mistake you for a big weirdo, when you are a small one. Izuku mocked calmly. The villain only got upset and launched tentacles, created with his own body, against the black-haired man. But a wind current formed at that moment, and everything went crazy with it. The villain was sent flying into a wall, while a person was standing at the entrance of the sewer. Everything is fine, I'm here, exclaimed Almight, the #1 hero of all Japan, a muscular man taller than most people. He wears a shirt that hugs his body and loose green pants and black boots. But when he saw the situation better, he noticed that not only the villain was unconscious, but also Izuku, who was lying next to the villain. Some time later. That guy doesn't think, he's all muscle and no brain, said Albedo angrily to herself in the mind of an Izuku who woke up on a park bench. Hey, I see you finally woke up, I'm glad about that, All Might said with a bright smile, looking at the black-haired man who blew his head. Although he was a little worried about the patch on his right eye, he ignored it. Anything possible, exclaimed Izuku in amazement, and with stars in his eyes. That's right, young man, I'm All Might, by the way, tend this. He entered his notebook of heroes. It's quite interesting what you have there, keep it up and you can become one. Now excuse me as I have to go, there are important things I have to do, said All Might, raising his thumb and being about to take a big leap. Wait, I have to ask you a question, Izuku said hurriedly, managing to hold the hero's pants. The instant he did that, by the time he realized it, they were already several meters in the air. He was internally smiling at the power his idol was displaying, and he knew that this was nothing compared to what would surely be his 100%. Hey, what are you doing? Let go of your shonen, you can't come with me, I have important things to do, said All Might, seeing Izuku on his leg. But if I do, I'll die, said Izuku with a vein in his head. Sierra, sorry about that, wait, let me find a place to land, All Might said with a nervous smile. It doesn't take long before they both land on the highest peak of a building. Izuku sighed in relief at not having to show any of his transformations, then turned to see All Might. Well, since you're okay, I have to go, there are important things I have to do, said All Might, about to jump. Wait, I have a question to ask, can a Quirkless be a hero without any quirk? Izuku asked out loud. Even though he had the Ultimatrix, he wanted to continue growing on his own. He wanted to be a hero who would bring hope and happiness to people. He didn't like being a vigilante at all, much less breaking the law. He even had the idea of making his own hero academy where there would no longer be the heroes who now roamed the streets in search of fame. He could create a better world, even if it would cost him, he would do it. I'm sorry, but you can't be a hero without a gift. It's necessary to fight the evil that plagues society. But look on the bright side, you're young, you can still choose to be a doctor, police officer, firefighter, among other jobs. Maybe they aren't heroes like the real heroes, but they do help society and people. If you'll excuse me, I have to go, All Might said before jumping, taking off from the ground that was the roof of the building and disappearing from sight. From Izuku to the distance. Izuku just stood there in that addition, looking down. For a few moments they pressed their hands into fists before letting go of the pressure and sighing. He turned around and began walking towards the rooftop entrance before opening the door. Some time later. What was I thinking? It's clear that a Quirkless can't be a hero, Izuku thought with annoyance, walking through the streets of the city. It was something obvious. After all, this society is governed by popularity, and for that you have to have power, said Albedo in Izuku's mind, who sighed. There are so many bad things in this society, in this world created by quirks. Although hundreds of years have passed, the technology is still from hundreds of years ago. We haven't advanced at all. We're falling behind in a horrible way. So many diseases that would now be cured, people who wouldn't die in suffering. Izuku thought, looking at the ground. But where there were also wars and steps of power, it doesn't matter if it's with a quirk or not. The world is like that. Life is like that. Only the strongest survive while the weak die. You have to be willing to make sacrifices and the will and courage to do things as well as responsibility. Albedo said in Izuku's mind, who looked up, seeing in front a large group of people and fire rising in the distance. Is it worth it to remain the same as always, to remain the kind person who is taken advantage of? Izuku asked, walking towards the place of the disaster. It didn't take long to arrive, and due to its size it managed to get through the people. The question is not whether it is worth being kind or someone good, the real question is it worth continuing to be weak? Albedo asked Izuku, who stopped in place at the AI's question, and what was in front of him. Katsumi was held by the mud villain along with Izumi. Both of them were crying from helplessness and fear. But as fate would have it, they both saw Izuku's only visible eye. It was as if time had stopped for the three of them. No, it's not worth continuing to be weak, Izuku said, a smile forming on his lips before raising his hand and giving the middle finger to both girls, who were surprised and felt hurt by what Izuku did to them. He then turned around and began to walk away, a smile on his lips. You know, Albedo, it's time to at least finish repairing the Ultimatrix system. He brings his hand to his right eye patch, where he takes it off his eyes, showing his scar. It's time to show this world what a brilliant mind is capable of and the potential of technology, and not genetic errors. Izuku said seriously, opening his right eye and showing a red iris which shone in blood. Years later, Izuku found himself in a room, illuminated by a ceiling light. A simple view, everything around him was a makeshift laboratory, and the structure was that of an abandoned building. He found himself soldering something on his table. Once he was done, he lifted it up, revealing it to be a bracelet with tubes on the sides and a metal piece where the wrist would be, and a dull digital button ulcer. Next to it was the core of the Ultimatrix, where he put on the bracelet, before placing the core in the hole. He made a turn before inserting himself completely, and the tubes, buttons and LEDs lit up, revealing the new Ultimatrix. Izuku dreams at his new achievement, turning the dial and going through hologram after hologram, showing every alien form he had. Now with this, I have the power to bring my enemies to their knees. I will show everyone that I am not a weakling, my family, Bakuga's animal, but above all this damn world. Izuku said seriously, but he still had that proud and cheerful smile. I see you achieve something interesting for yourself, said a voice behind Izuku. He didn't even flinch, he just snorted. I see that my stalker finally appears before me, said Izuku, turning around and seeing who was there. Did you know of my presence? Asked a being made of a black mist and purple edges, bright yellow eyes. His body, with a human silhouette, wears an elegant suit, and on his neck he has some kind of device. Kurogiri, I suppose you came on behalf of your owner and master, Izuku said, crossing his arms and sitting at his table. The shadow stood still in place, looking surprised. How much do you know? Kurogiri asked seriously. Izuku just laughed maliciously. Just get to the point, please, Izuku said with a superior smile when he saw how Kurogiri looked annoyed. My master wants you to join our organization, Kurogiri said calmly, preferring not to bother the teenager in front of him. Seriously? You guys have to be desperate to come and bother a nearly 15-year-old kid, Izuku openly mocked. How about we talk about this in a calmer way, and if you allow me, I would like to go to my teacher to discuss this matter, Kurogiri said, narrowing his eyes and paying attention to what Izuku would do at any moment. The black-haired man, who had his right eye exposed, thought about it for a few moments, before shaking his head and walking towards the shadow. Fine, I accept. Use your quirk and take me to the... Izuku said calmly before being enveloped by Kurogiri's shadow and disappearing. Chapter 5, A Different Climate. By narrator. Well, what do you want from me? Izuku asked, crossing his arms. He was in a completely dark place, only being illuminated by a light that shines exactly on him. I like that you want to get straight to the point. I want to offer you an opportunity to enter our organization," said a voice from the darkness. Izuku raised an eyebrow, curious and confused. "Don't you have enough dogs out there? Why do you want me on your side?" Izuku asked calmly, conditionally and curiously. He didn't really feel afraid in the place where he was. "They are not enough, apart from their quality doesn't compare to yours, Red Clock," said the voice maliciously. Even Izuku could tell he was smiling. He just sighed before turning around and looking at a specific point. He felt the gaze directly on him from the one who called him, and his current chatterbox also felt the gaze of the black-haired man on him. "You can't offer me anything, all for one," said Izuku with simplicity and a smile. "I see you know me. It's nice that you haven't forgotten me," all for one said from the shadows. "That's right, and it's a pleasure to have you before me, Shigaraki Tamura. Oops, I forgot that you gave your real name to the boy who dash," Izuku said with a mocking and amused smile. But he would be silent when an air bullet passed by his face, causing a small cut. But instead of scaring him, it only caused him to smile with superiority. "I see you know information from the forgotten past," said all for once bitterly. Izuku just chuckled, which bothered him. "Now, let's stop playing around and forget about the 10 cents you're offering me to join your association of ridiculous animals," Izuku asked calmly and with a smile, putting his hands in the pockets of his jacket. I hear a snort in the darkness, before everyone spoke up. "Resources, you would no longer have to throw away trash to get what you want, a safe and reliable laboratory, as well as accessible 24 hours a day for your personal use. Also, that implies security, and if your identity is discovered it will be forgotten instantly," said all for one with a formal and calm tone, although Izuku's tone was a bit forced. "I can get all that if you really want to do it. Give me something more valuable. Apart, I can tell that you want more from me than just joining your trained Pareo's organization," said Izuku, bored. "I see you noticed. I can give you power, whatever you want and whatever kind you want. In exchange, I want you to be my Albedo and an important infiltrator in my planes," said all for one. "Why do you want me to be an infiltrator, if you already have that boy called Oyama, who made your hitch to have no other choice but to obey you when you gave him a gift?" Izuku said with a smile. Silence fell when he said that. With it, a heavy atmosphere arose and a killing intent arose. Izuku trembled in place, but took a deep breath to calm himself and hold the computer. "As you know about my planes and about me," all for one said seriously, although his question sounded more like an order that had to be followed rather than a choice. "You are easy to find and get information from, believe me. I am not a fool guided by this society of devolved people," said Izuku with a confident smile. But he saw how some red lines formed in the darkness, and some stakes/tentacles made of a black material with red lines emerged from the darkness and looked straight at Izuku to kill him. But with that, a crimson flash appeared, and in Izuku's place a Necrophrygian took his place. The stakes passed through his body without harming him as they became intangible. Not only that, he also froze those same stakes, which he took advantage of to break them with a few blows. What was left of them returned to their owner. Izuku just closed his eyes seriously. "I wasn't expecting you to take that form. I thought you would take the form similar to a diamond," all for one said. He began to walk and peek out from the darkness. A man as tall as Almight, wearing a formal suit and a helmet on his skeleton-shaped head, covering his entire face and possessing tukos that connected to something behind the villain. "Darth Vader?" exclaimed Izuku to see everyone's helmet for one. "If only you knew," the villain answers, confusing the teenager. Anyway, are you still interested in me as your ally? Although it's stupid to ask about your recent actions, Big Child said when he saw all for one ascending. "Sorry for my previous reaction, just you caught me off guard, that's all. But by the way, how do you really know about that?" He apologized and asked everyone in unison. "I just had to get into the minds of villains. I wanted to find something and by mistake I found you. Besides, I wanted to know more about the world in the dark, so I investigated and investigated. I met several villains, among them you, and what a surprise to me to see that you were still alive. I looked for you to see what you were capable of, and I saw how you enslaved that Aoyama boy," Izuku said. This only bothered everyone for one. "Why didn't you do anything? They all asked together with curiosity. The idiot got himself into that trouble. It's either my fault nor my mistake. Let that regressed ape take care of his mistake and problem, Izuku said, shrugging his shoulders. You are even more interesting than I thought, Izuku Midoriya. Praise all for one. Izuku just snorted silently at what the villain was saying. Anyway, let's finish this once and for all, Izuku said before pressing the dial on the Ultimatrix. A wave was expelled by the dollar, enveloping Izuku and causing his appearance to change. His wings grew larger, as did his antennae. The spike/horns on his shoulders grew larger and wider. His color changed to a light cream, almost white. His fur turned orange, as did the spots on his body, and a lighter orange formed above the orange spots and fur, blending into each other. This was the same case with his wings, which are orange, but are ice-colored on the inside. The red lines on them are now blue on the inside and out, with the inside still having a red line and red circle. Ice replaced the fur on his wrists, and his equipment is now metal, with the white fabric now being red. Ultimate Necrophrygian saw a shocked and confused look all for one. With that, a smile formed on the alien moth's mouth. He moved his wings, generating a stream of ice that was blocked by a pulse of heat. The environment became hot. On the part of all for one who already knew this transformation of Izuku, gave him the advantage. Now he only had to use fire quirks to defeat him and obtain his power. He launched a call against Izuku. He just became intangible, which all for one noticed and made him angry. That intangibility was annoying, quite annoying. But I noticed something. Suddenly, the temperature of the environment dropped in less than 5 seconds to 0 degrees, when its fire also disappeared. That's when I noticed a drastic change in the last Necrophrygian. His clear cleavage changed to a pale red. His wings are now orange with red inside and have red, different orange and yellow lines and lights, as well as the antennae now yellow. The orange before the spots became pale and was now accompanied by a light/pale yellow. Heat absorption, you weren't supposed to have it, said all for one with astonishment and seriousness, but at the same time with hidden interest. Well, it's a new trick, I think, Izuku said before he started spinning on his edge in the air. With that, he released fire in the form of threads that expanded the further they advanced in the air. Soon the fire enveloped everything around it, before disappearing and revealing that in its place was pure, resistant, and durable ice. Izuku walked up to a frozen all-for-one and landed in front of it. I'll think about your proposal. It caught my attention. In the meantime, don't bother me, Izuku said seriously, before becoming intangible once again and leaving the place to go through the walls. Should we stop him, sir? Kurogiri asked, appearing next to all for one who passed through the ice that held him as if he were a ghost. No, let's let him enjoy his silly childish story. Anyway, he'll come back to us sooner or later, said all for one calmly, Kurogiri moving forward at what all for one said. Some time later, Izuku was walking through a shopping mall. He had his medical patch on his right eye. He was wearing a combination of a jacket and a hoodie, red with black lines, with the number 10 on the right side, dark blue jeans and black and white sports shoes. He was shopping for some personal items. In the distance, he also saw his mother and sister shopping for his things. He just sighed. He could leave or do something else with them, but he wanted to keep a low profile and not draw attention. It was better to continue acting like an average nobody instead of showing off his genius and his newfound power. He just watched them, his mother and sister so happy, so ignorant. Until his sister turned to look at him for a few moments. A cold and serious expression was enough to scare her and make her look away again. Smiling internally at this, he was about to take a step until a loud thud was heard in the place. Kaiju! It's the tentacle defender hero! A girl shouted in the distance. Curious, Izuku raised an eyebrow and hesitated for a few seconds, before going to where the scream came from. Being on the second floor, he saw from his place on the railing, a hero, generating tentacles of an orange matter. On the ground and being held by the hero, a criminal. Izuku just snorted, a hero who was just starting out and wouldn't be much of a thing in the future. His quirk only works on short and medium distance capture. A long distance would strain his tentacles and they would break. He was about to leave, before he noticed something. The criminal's look of fear and worry, as well as that of depression, sadness, and suffocating anguish. He raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Normally criminals didn't have those emotions. He found it really curious, although he didn't give it much thought and started to leave. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw the heroes start posing for the cameras, which annoyed him. But something else caught his attention. The villain was crying. Izuku stood still in his spot, now looking directly at what was happening. The image of him and Katsuki stood in the way, with Izuku lying on the ground crying, while Katsuki mocked him above him. Both being 5 years old. Thanks, it was no big deal, said the hero with a bright smile for the cameras while being flattered by his fans. But something caught everyone's attention. A flash of crimson light was seen in the distance, before a red silhouette fell in front of everyone. Izuku, transformed into a polymorph, went against the hero, who, surprised and scared, used his hair-like tentacles against the gelatinous alien. But the alien only turned acidic and burned his tentacles. Tentacle Defender now used his tentacles as spider legs and moved away from the alien, who tried to reach him. But he propelled himself with his anti-gravity projector and tried to reach it, but at that moment a current of air stopped him and made him go back. Turning back and standing next to the criminal with a broken mask, Izuku saw how other heroes had arrived at the place. Annoyed, he just made his anti-gravity projector turn his gelatinous body into a ball before firing several slime bullets that hit their targets, which were stopped and stuck against the floors or walls of the place. After that act, he wrapped the criminal up with himself before starting to move and leave the place. But one of them managed to free itself, being the defending tentacle, who was upset and looked at Izuku with hatred. "Calm down, citizens, I will take care of stopping the villain Red Clock," said the hero with a victorious smile, using his tentacles as spider legs and filling after Izuku. This one moved above the ground. You had to touch it from time to time before taking off with force and propelling itself further away. It moved among the people who were frightened and moved away from fear. "Hold on a few more moments, I'll get you out of me," Izuku said to the criminal inside him, who seemed to be running out of air. He was close to the exit door, but he saw how several guards began to get in front. This annoyed Izuku, who just lifted him up and stepped over them. He moved a little on the ground before releasing the criminal and throwing him towards the door, which was opened by being hit by the criminal himself, who once he recovered saw Izuku with surprise, while breathing for air. "Go away, I'll take care of them now," said the polymorph, taking his semi-humanoid form and assuming a combat stance. The criminal was quick to obey and began to run, fleeing the scene. "Your illicit acts end today, Red Clock," said the defending tentacle hero, defending the ground before Izuku. "We see that you are also going against me," said Izuku, narrowing his gaze. "Well, I doubt it will be difficult for me with someone with such a shrill voice," the hero mocked before going against Izuku, who did the same, running against the hero. Tentacle Defender launched his tentacles at Izuku, who caught them with one hand and pulled them, causing the hero to be unable to retreat. But at that moment his arms were destroyed by crystal bullets. Turning his gaze, he saw a new hero. He looked at him carefully and did not recognize him at all, but seeing his young appearance, he was surely a rookie and recently graduated from some academy. He rebuilt his arms to pull her remains to the ground and prepared for what was to come. More crystals were fired at him, but these now only pierced his body. Both heroes, annoyed by this, stopped and looked at their real rival, who was watching them calmly. "It's time to end this," Izuku said seriously. "I say the same." The tentacle defending hero spoke with the same gravity. "And with his heroic runs," Izuku said, which surprised the two. Creating slime tentacles, Izuku grabbed the tentacle hero by his hair. The other hero, who seemed to possess crystal kinesis, tried to get away but was also grabbed by one of the goop tentacles. Izuku exerted his strength and sent the one with the crystals against the wall, crashing into it with all his strength and causing his bones to break, before turning the limb holding the hero's hair into acid. "Ah, stop, you bastard!" The hero of pain screamed. By reflex, he tried to bring his hands to the area of pain, but Izuku stopped him with another slime tentacle that blocked his movements. His screams were heard throughout the area and were seen with horror and fear by those present. Even some of his fans cried from the helplessness of what was happening to their hero. When Izuku finished, he raised him before slamming him against the ground, which cracked and broke the hero's bones, who ended up unconscious on the ground. After that, Izuku saw how more heroes, including the police, began to arrive in the area, watching with astonishment and concern what the reddish villain did. "It's better if I go, I've already drawn too much attention," Izuku said before being enveloped by a crimson flash. This caused everyone to cover their eyes, and when the light disappeared and they could see clearly, they noticed that the villain Red Clock was no longer there. Some time later, in an alley, that criminal was crying bitterly, sitting on a garbage can. At that moment, Izuku turned into goop, began to descend, clinging to the wall. "Sorry for the delay, are you okay?" Izuku asked the criminal, who jumped and fell to the ground. Izuku saw him on the ground, his face teary, the tears freshly shed. It was like verse to himself, but a bigger version. "Maybe I would have been like him, if I didn't get the Ultimatrix." Hey, calm down, you're okay now, I won't do anything to you," Izuku said calmly and moving to the ground. "You are Red Clock," was the only one who said. The criminal saw the red color of Izuku and the symbol on his anti-gravity projector. "That's right, and you are," Izuku said, looking at the villain, who understood what Izuku meant. "Flint Marco," the criminal responded. He saw how Izuku raised an eyebrow. "My father is not from Japan," was the only response from the man, and Izuku ascended at that. "And why were they crying, Flint?" Izuku asked curiously. "It's personal stuff, it's not a big deal," Flint lied seriously. Izuku just shrugged. "Well, if you say so, it's not my problem," said Izuku. He was about to leave, but at that moment he is enveloped by a black mist. Even the criminal next to him is enveloped by a black mist. When they managed to see where they were, they found themselves in the same place where Kurogiri took Izuku for the first time. "Where are we?" Flint asked seriously, his knuckles turning into solid sand, although it was a partial transformation. "Where a degenerate always waits for his next victims," Izuku said, moving from one place to another, before stopping and looking directly at a specific point. "I told you I would think about it, you really have the balls to bring me before you again," Izuku said, annoyed. "Oops, that was a mistake, we only wanted the guy who accompanied you here," he mocked. "All for one." Izuku just snorted before turning back into his human form, which surprised Flint to see that the villain child Red Clock was just a. At this point they all started talking again. "Mr. Flint, I heard about your family problem, your little daughter is suffering from cancer, I like it said the villain, but he would be interrupted. "Get to the point," Flint said seriously and directly. "I'm starting to feel old, each generation is more direct than the last." All for One thought with annoyance. "I want you to join my organization, in exchange, we will find a cure for your daughter," All for One said to the man who seemed thoughtful. Izuku, watching everything with boredom, decided to sit on the ground and see what would happen. Really, all of this was pathetic for him. "Not only that, we'll also teach you how to use your quirk better and how to improve it yourself, do you accept?" I finished All for One of offering. Flint stood still in his place thinking about the offer. "I accept," the criminal replied seriously. He didn't care what would happen to him anymore, he just wanted his daughter to live and have a normal life, and as her father he had the duty to fulfill that. "Seeing that he accepts, I'm also curious about what will happen," Izuku said, standing up and speaking seriously. "Perfect, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the League of Villains," said All for One with great enthusiasm. But that only made Flint uncomfortable. On the other hand, Izuku completely ignores him. In his head, he only thinks about Flint's reason for becoming a villain over and over again. He never expected someone to steal or commit a crime in order to help another person. That just annoys him. It bothered him how closed-minded society was when it came to respecting criminals and villains. Maybe there were more people like Flint, whose society left behind without help or how to survive on their own. Did he justify his actions? Izuku just shrugged. It was obvious he didn't. After all, the easy way was elegant, but who was he to judge them? After all, he is also on the easy path. Chapter 6: The Return of an Acquaintance. Point of view narrator. Izuku sighed. He really didn't like what he just heard. Not because he didn't like it or because it affected him, just it would bother him. Right now she was in front of a stretcher, in that place, her mother who was listening to what the doctors were saying to her, and so was her husband, who was hugging her on the left side, while Izumi looked at her with concern. We regret to tell this Midoriya family, but the tests that were done after her fainting at home diagnosed her with a disease known as the Red Death, a disease from the beginning of the era of gifts. Being something hereditary and according to the little information that is available, it is activated randomly in its carriers. They cause a reddish pigmentation above the skin following the blood vessels of the veins. Slowly the patient will lose their vital forces, to the point that they lose their life, explained the doctor seriously and anguished. Shock came to everyone. Hisashi jumped and stood in front of the doctor, while his daughter looked with more concern at her mother. The mother went blank. "Doctor, tell me there is a cure," Hisashi begged desperately, but the doctor's denial only made him more desperate. Everything began to fall further, when despair and sadness hit the Midoriya family. A special case among them was Izuku, who only saw everything from a safe distance, and without attracting anyone's attention, being with a blank explosion and without showing any sign of emotion. He just stood there, watching his family's world fall apart. Scene break. Izuku was walking calmly through the middle of a square. He looked at the sky. In the distance, the horizon was tinged orange turning reddish, while on the other side the night arrived peacefully and calmly. It was a majestic landscape for the black-haired man with green locks. A smile had formed on his lips. He finished his walk and sat down on a bench, where he began to rest. He moved his right arm, where the Ultimatrix was being covered by the sleeve of his white sweatshirt/jacket with red lines and edges. He took his hand to his pocket where he took out a small container, a test tube hermetically sealed with 2 pieces of metal at each end, with the content that is blood. On one side, he has a paper where the name of his mother, Izuku Midoriya, is written. He played with it as he twirled it between his fingers, before stopping and looking closely, before sighing. "Let's see how much trouble can this disease give me?" said Izuku, interested, with a tiny smile forcing its way between his lips. "What are you planning to do?" Albedo asked from the Ultimatrix, not detecting any source of intelligent life around her. "I just want to see what I'm capable of, if I'm smart enough to surpass those I couldn't discover or find a cure for this disease," Izuku said with a confident smile. "I see," was the simple response of Albedo, who understood what Izuku wanted. Boom! Izuku blinked when he heard an explosion in the distance. He soon saw civilians fleeing from where the explosion came from. Looking at where it came from, he noticed that it came from a small-sized shopping mall. He just sighed and watched the scene with boredom. It was at that moment that he blinked in surprise. Since when was he so insensitive? He just shrugged his shoulders, thinking about it for a few moments. It wasn't that big of a deal. What made him think about that was the mall explosion, something that happens every day in every part of the country or world. Besides, the injuries to people when that happened weren't that big of a deal compared to other people who suffer from anguish, poverty, or illness every day. "I better get out of here," Izuku said boredly, about to get up when he noticed a golden light above him. "Hey! You should get out of here!" said a female voice above him. Curious, he looked up, blushing instantly when he saw who was flying above him. A beautiful girl, as well as cute. What made the green-haired boy blush was the navy green suit fitted to her body, with lighter tones and covering her arms and thighs in black, with yellow gloves being wrapped by thick pints of the same color as the suit. Her face was, in short words of Izuku, a work of art. Even in a serious moment, she sounds to him with sweetness and great joy. Her sapphire eyes saw him with a great shine of light, and her blue hair danced in the air, along with the 2 strands of hair that were forming a spiral and simulated horns. "You an angel," Izuku whispered, blushing, looking at the girl above him. "Hey! Can you hear me?" she suddenly asked, bringing Izuku out of his delirium. Sorry, I heard you. What were you saying?" Izuku asked with a small hesitation at the beginning, but he quickly regained his composure. "You need to get out of here. There's a scary monster with an exposed brain attacking that mall." the girl said hurriedly and seriously. Izuku tilts his head slightly before sighing. Okay, I'm leaving, said Izuku, getting up from his seat and putting his mother's blood in one of his pockets. Thank you very much for understanding, exclaimed the girl with a bright smile that embarrassed Izuku. Yes, it is better that you go help the others, Izuku said and began to leave the place hastily. 10 for sure, she said to the green-haired man who shrank in his place before walking faster again. That only confused and stranged the girl, who just shrugged and turned around, before flying off towards the mall. Damn, I have to learn how to deal with girls, Izuku said, embarrassed and leaning against the wall, while a strong blush appeared on his face. Ha, Izuku, I swear I would break your face if I could, said Albedo from the Ultimatrix, which alarmed Izuku. And why is that? Izuku asked, confused and alarmed. Nothing, said Albedo simply. Izuku preferred not to say anything about it. He didn't want another section of pure insults from the AI. He just shook his head before starting to walk. For today, he would just go home to sleep instead of doing his patrols, as they called it. Meow. This is Izuku. Who is it? Said Izuku, answering an incoming call to his phone after hearing his ringtone. I have a mission for you, said a voice on the other end that Izuku identifies perfectly. Speak fast, all for one. I was about to go to sleep, Izuku said heavily. We've launched an experiment of ours into a shopping mall, to see how good it is on the battlefield, said all for one on the other end of the call. And you want me to take care of him and not have the police or heroes take him away, apart from the fact that I observed his performance? Izuku asked, although he already knew the answer. That's right, said all for one. Izuku just ascended and turned around. You're lucky I'm close to the place, Izuku said before cutting the call. He just brought his left hand to his right arm, where he moved the sleeve of his jacket and showed the Ultimatrix, which activated the instant it was shown. Izuku printed it before his silhouette was enveloped by a light. His body walled and changed, turning green, while his fingers joined together into 3 claws. Marks appeared on his face, and his feet lengthened, his ankle now being a joint of the leg and not the foot. A light enveloped him completely. When the light disappeared, a kind of humanoid lizard was revealed, with a thin appearance, but with muscle, as if it were an athlete. It wears a black suit with red on the torso and white on the chest, where the Ultimatrix symbol was. It wears a helmet that ends in a point and spheres between the toes. Its tail has parts where its green skin shows. Apart from that, it has 3 claws per hand. White and red lines on the suit, and from the elbows some protuberances came out pointing backwards. He looked around, noticing that he hadn't drawn anyone's attention, and laughed at that. He had modified the course of the transformations and had lowered the light release to almost 0, as well as the time it took him to transform. He saw his right claw, which opened and closed quickly. He felt a little strange. He had modified the transformation time from one to the other by 1 second, being before 3 and maximum 7 depending on the size of these. But now the reduction to an absolute 1, those seconds were valid and now he had them. Although that did leave him with a strange feeling transforming in such a fast way, but nothing that some adjustments to the Ultimatrix couldn't fix. A visor lowered from the helmet he was wearing, revealing a black visor with a reddish lens that glowed the same color. He shifted at high speed, leaving a red and green trail behind him. It didn't take him even 5 seconds to be in the mall. He saw around him heroes evacuating civilians, while a creature caused chaos in the middle of them all. A being of greenish-gray, almost absolute black, wearing red pants. The most notable thing about his body were the multiple surgery scars, his muscles that did not look natural but artificial, as if they had been achieved by steroids, a metal mask covering his face. And what stood out the most, an exposed brain, with nothing covering it, apart from a translucent substance that prevented it from hanging and crumbling, and the deformity in his arms, like his left shoulder larger and his right arm larger than the other. His feet also had a size deformity, although the largest, the left one, looked like that of an elephant instead of a human. Izuku moved and stayed far away, seeing everything from a distance and hiding so as not to attract anyone's attention. He watched the creature with interest. According to what his visor with integrated technology showed, he detected the creature as an artificial one, with orders programmed in its brain that was now nothing more than a central processing unit (CPU), along with part of its spine that functioned as a secondary system and assistant to the brain, with its nerves functioning as cables. There was no need to explain the other parts of the body. It was something that Izuku discovered, more to see that it is 100% organic, although its functioning is barely around 70%. He could see from the analysis that several of its organs were disconnected. Also, its capacities were significantly reduced, added to the fact that the deformity of its body does not help at all. It was a total disaster for everything that science and nature meant, as well as a mistake in life itself, something that should not exist, but for some reason it does. He watched as the monster hit a car that was being used as a demonstration for a new model that was to be released. It flew through the air before landing on top of some civilians. But at the last moment, crystal columns emerged and blocked it. It was at that moment that someone jumped forward and faced the monster. Izuku could only open his eyes from the utter surprise he felt at that moment. In front of the monster, a being made of diamond-like crystal was found, wearing a tight black and white suit, forming a yin-yang, with the base of the boots being green and having two green lines that pass behind the neck and down the torso. A symbol similar to the Ultimatrix but green is found on the chest of this being. Omnitrix, said Albedo dryly. Tennyson. I pronounce Izuku, now narrowing his eyes. The presence of his former classmate will undoubtedly surprise him greatly. But it was not the time for that, he had better things to do. Sorry, but I can't allow you to hurt people in this place. Let's see how good you are against Diamond Head too, Ben said with a confident smile and facing the monster that jumped at him. The fight didn't last long. Pillars made of crystal emerged from the ground when Diamond Head punched it with a fist, thus sending the monster flying. It roared in pain. After that, the Petrosapien began to shoot crystals from his hands as if they were bullets. These hit the monster as it fell, which began to be crystallized and enveloped by a dense layer of Diamond Head's crystal. Boom! The sound is heard throughout the area, as the monster, enveloped in a thick layer of glass, lands hard on the ground. At that, Ben just gasps and releases one of his fingers, as if it were the barrel of a gun that had just been fired. You're welcome. I know I deserve the credit, but there's no need for it, Diamond Head said with a smile. But if he could only break a sweat, he would have done so to watch the heroes approach him with a serious face. As always, being a total fool. Izuku hissed in disappointment. Although he didn't expect anything from him, he was still disappointed to see that nothing changed in all those years and he was still the same incredulous fool. Bam! A new thud was heard as Benjamin was sent crashing into a wall, courtesy of a hero with a strength-enhancing quirk. Don't think you're going to get away that easy, Watchman, said the hero with a smile approaching the Petrosapien, who growled angrily. Please friend, I did your job, at least you should thank me, said Ben angrily as he gets up from the ground and looks at the hero with an eye. Do my job? You just came to steal our credit, said the hero with disgust and hatred in his voice. But at that moment, a reddish light caught his attention. Quickly turning his head, he saw how that same light dimmed until it was next to the crystallized monster. Bam! A new knock resounded in the place and the light disappeared, now revealing a 3-meter humanoid being, similar to a dinosaur, of a dull brown color, with gray tones, with a lighter one above it. Its eyes glow neon red and the Ultimatrix symbol is on its chest. It's Red Watch, is heard saying from a civilian who was still at the place, easily identified as Izuku by the Ultimatrix symbol. Everybody run! Another civilian shouted as he fled the scene. A behavior that was followed by others, even heroes did it. Humongosaurus? Diamond Head exclaimed in disbelief upon seeing the Vaxasaurian standing next to the monster, and was even more confused and surprised to see the red Omnitrix on the alien's chest. Correction. He brings his hand to the Ultimatrix symbol and turns the dial, exposing the core of it. It's Ultimate Vaxasaurian, Izuku said with a smile before pressing the dial of his Ultimatrix. 4 darker metallic hooks extended from the dial, digging into the alien's skin before releasing a wave of power that began to course through the Vaxasaurian's body. It grew larger and more robust, and a shell began to form on its body as its skin paled. Spikes emerged from its body, as did metallic pieces, the most obvious being those on its limbs such as its arms, legs, and head. Although on its arms they were under the skin, tearing the flesh, its tail lengthened and at the end it had a ball with spikes. "Let me introduce you to Ultimate Humongousaur, wielder of the Omnitrix," said Izuku with a smile. "Who are you really?" Ben asked seriously. "I'm not a devolved ape like you, so as to say my true identity," said Izuku with annoyance and bothering Ben. The Petrosapien ran towards his enemy, preparing to fight, while he began to fire his crystals. But with a simple blow to the ground he created a kinetic shockwave that went against Ben, knocking him back and leaving him lying on the ground. After that, a gun hammering was heard, and when the villain Red Clock was seen, it was seen as if his right arm turned into a firearm that began to shoot at Diamond Head. This generated colossal explosions that injured the Petrosapien, who was sent out of the mall. After that, Izuku returned his hand back to normal, before taking the crystal with one hand and preparing his other hand, before hitting the crystal and breaking it completely. The monster trapped inside it moved before falling to its knees. Izuku just snorted at that. Did he have to watch this pathetic thing? The mere fact of that was already an insult to his person. Izuku just growled in annoyance, and watched as more heroes came towards him. He just surprisingly jumped up before turning and spinning in the air, before slamming his tail into the ground, which only demonstrated a powerful shockwave. The entire area began to collapse as well as the upper floors. Overall, most of the mall was starting to fall down, perhaps the entire mall. Izuku just raised his hand and waved goodbye to the heroes before taking the monster with his other hand. They were instantly sucked into a black mist belonging to Kurogyri. "Welcome, Benjamin Kirby Tennyson, finally a worthy rival bows before me," said Izuku, being swallowed by the mist. The last thing it covered and consumed was his right eye, which allowed him to see how Ben charged against the now converted into his own version of Humongousaur. But unfortunately he didn't make it when the mist disappeared along with Izuku and the monster, leaving a frustrated and annoyed Ben. But he opened his eyes in surprise to see how the place was falling. He had to act quickly and save those who were there.
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.